Welcome to another episode of Chasing Labels. I am Stephen Billings, your host, and always with me is your other host, Andrew Cabral. How you doing, man?
Doing good. What spine number is this, Stephen? Are we at 49?
49, man. Spine number 49.
Good. I'm glad you're keeping track.
Yeah, I mean, the shelf's getting full of episodes of Chasing Labels. Make sure you're getting your limited edition versions because the standard editions will be coming out.
Posters,
Yeah.
art cards, all of the above come in all these limited editions.
Yeah,
when it comes to Chasing
we want to
Labels.
make sure you get the most deluxe edition possible. There's only 1,000 copies.
Of course.
Of each.
Super limited.
So, but as usual, we have a great guest with us this week. He is coming, as a lot of these guys, they're always out in California for some reason. I don't know why California is where movie people are. But he has been involved in so many things. First being, he's a writer on a great documentary I love. This Is Not Yet Rated is one of my favorite film documentaries. He's also written a book on the middle finger. He's also, does podcasts. He did the Warner Archive podcast, and now he's doing a new podcast called The Archive Guys. And with us is Matt Patterson. How you doing, man?
Hey, guys. It's always exciting to connect with physical media lovers, as I see from the background of your personal recording studios.
Well, I can tell you right now, that's just cardboard cutout stuff. That's not actually okay. Andrew's is real, but
yeah, my stuff is legit.
Yeah, mine's just cardboard cutout. I want people to think that I like Blu-rays, but I don't really like them.
I mean, and I don't even plan on having this much Warner Archive stuff out.
Right.
It's just
it's
just stacks.
That was legit, just right there. My stacks are out there because I got them for free. and I'd have to watch
the best
them.
price.
Yeah,
the best price.
Great. That's great for you. I'm so glad that you got that for free.
Yeah.
God,
I know.
guys brag so much.
I had to work, but yeah.
Yeah, now of course.
True. So you worked for it. So technically, you gave something.
I gave up my time.
Your time, your energy.
One of the wonderful things about doing that job, and why some people ask, Matt, how did you kind of get into that from, Warner Brothers? And the answer was, I would watch the movies.
Yeah.
It seems kind of simple, but when these movies would come out, when I first started working there, I'd be like, oh, this is really cool. Oh, this is good. And people would be like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, oh, you guys don't actually watch movies, do you? They did, but they were normal people.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. They can, a traditional marketer can learn about their fans. But I had I wasn't a super deep fan, right? I was friends with those people. They would do all the hard work and tell me what to watch. But then all of a sudden, when I was at the source, I'm like, oh, now I'm in the middle of this kind of pipeline. So
yeah.
Not only was I able to actually get some people to come in and work with us who were, qualified professionally, who did, curation and knew that, but I got to jump off the deep end. And thousands of discs later in my apartment, here I am.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I'm sure you're just lining your walls. I mean, now you told us beforehand that you had to give up a lot of stuff. You had to give up a lot of discs
during the pandemic. We were all sent home, and because as someone who watches a lot of films and reads books, science fiction books, I'm like. Some people were like, oh, we'll be back at work in 2 weeks. And I'm packing up and I'm like, no, trust me. I'm an expert in science fiction. It's going to be 3 months.
At least 3 months.
Maybe 4. We might be back in time for Christmas. And and everyone's like, you're being so negative. And I was wrong. But the building that we worked in is never going to have really groups of people working back in it again. People are kind of starting to come back to the office, but they built a new building on the lot. It's actually 2 CEOs later. And
well, I was going to say,
across the street.
Warner Brothers just got bought and sold again.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to get back to Warner Archive.
Okay,
because
yes.
You did spend a lot of time there, but before, we always like to start out with the more personal side of like your love for movies, where that began. So where did that begin at for you as a little person? And I'm not saying midgets. And I know that's the derogatory term. I'm not saying you're short like that.
Yeah.
I'm just
No,
saying
I mean, I am sitting.
As a child, you mean?
yeah.
Well, as a child, I was, in fact.
That's easier
Yeah,
word.
I was short as a child. I was much shorter than I am now. So technically,
Okay.
but relative to other children, I was probably medium. However, when I was growing up, my love for old movies actually more came about from television. And I did not grow up with cable TV or anything, but I grew up in the New York area, which had a number of independent channels where they would show what we would now call old movies, right? And my parents weren't, they were pretty young when they had me, so I had relatively young grandparents, but they would get in conversations with me, especially my one grandmother would be like, "Oh, you're watching Abbott and Costello. I'm going to have a conversation with you about the Andrews sisters." So, I'm 8 years old and I'm conversant in popular culture of the 1940s, where I could talk to people in their 50s, about their, young adulthood. And, my grandmother would be like, "Oh, we're going to watch Murder, She Wrote. That's Angela Lansbury." Right. And then I'd be like, "Oh, okay." And then, but in a film and TV class in high school, I'm watching Angela Lansbury be, Frank Sinatra's mom. And I'm like, oh, number one, she still has the same hair. Number two, I'm starting to understand where my grandmother is coming from, right? Because it's like I go to Manchurian Candidate and then go to the musical, right? That's like sort of my discovery path. But I was the kind of kid who, it's like world building, right? Like I was into science fiction and fantasy. And one of the things that draws people in is the series of what ifs, like what if space travel, you could go between the stars, or in a Western, it's like they have a lot of what would be science fictional what if stories, right? What if barbed wire showed up and it's now being strung up and the cattlemen can't have the free range anymore and they are now fighting with the sheepmen, right? And I'm the kid who goes, cattlemen versus sheepmen, that's cool, right? Now I have questions. So that's sort of the deep dive of catalog, right? But cinema, you take a kid and you put him in a dark room and you have, at that time, right? I could see, I was a kid just at like the tail end of 70 millimeter presentation. And usually it was blown up, but it would be 5 channels and, it would be like 300, 400 seats, right? That's how I first saw like Star Wars. And it's so big, right? My brother's hiding under the seat but it just, that experience kind of burns into you, but it's special, right? And how do you recreate that special feeling at home? What's the difference between watching the Sunday afternoon movie and, like Star Wars, right? Like how can you recreate that in your home? And that's sort of always been a little bit of the home entertainment quest. How do you adequately recreate that? And it becomes a discovery process, right? And so that's kind of the meandering path that I started to get more and more into. And then by the time I went to college, I was learning filmmaking, but I was also learning film history. And kind of, as I said before, to me, film history is the greatest metaverse of all, right? History is our shared common culture. And the more you learn, the more it reveals, and the more these documents, right? Even a contemporary movie about a historic period, or even a movie from 50 years ago about a historic period, is different than if the movie was made in that historic period, right? Because it's all of our attitude, and it's just a big, fun puzzle. And that's really it, right? Did I keep that short? Was that under 400 minutes?
Very concise.
I think that was about 45 minutes, but it's what we can tighten it up in post. No, I'm just kidding. No, that was great, and I agree with you. We've talked about that a few times with some of the releases. We talk about where whenever there's a film that specific, like for instance, like what's the movie, Andrew, that's coming out by Indicator that you really liked that was like hard to find, that it was about the World War II. It was about a priest.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I gotta look it up now.
Come on, man. We need an IMDb guy. I thought you were my IMDb guy.
I know. He's usually
pretty good.
I'm usually that guy. But it's Pastor Hall.
Pastor Hall.
It just came. I didn't even have to see it.
You got it. I knew you'd get it.
This is why I'm on these things, because now I'm like, oh, let me write this down, right?
Yeah, so Pastor Hall is a film that's about, it's about that time period of like the Nazis and stuff like that and fascism and stuff, and it was made in that time period.
Right.
So like there's a lot more of an urgency to the film and a lot more of like a willing to take risks. Like I did not see the movie, but Andrew, the way he told me, he talked about it, was like, I was like, yeah, it sounds more amazing than seeing a movie now made about that time period where history, you've been able to reflect on it, know.
Right.
We know the end of World War II.
Yes, exactly.
There's no suspense.
Yes.
Right. But you're absolutely right. Like when you see a document in the moment, they don't know what's coming next. And some of it, sometimes you see, blind optimism, right? Like, and people like those movies now because they know the end. And when people are singing and dancing, they're celebrating. But at the same time, you put it's 1942, right? And now all of a sudden Hollywood is switching gears, and they have to, part of what their job is to lighten morale, right? And like, Abbott and Costello got to join the army, right? Like that's, but that's something that wasn't really part of our culture. Kind of people had still kind of a bad taste from World War I. Yeah. And in Hollywood, one of the interesting things to study, and there have been some good books that have more recently come out to try to contextualize this period. Most of Hollywood, and especially the MPAA, was not specifically anti-Nazi or German because they were making a lot of money in Germany. So the code, you weren't allowed to say Nazis were bad because they didn't want to offend them. But some studios and some independent filmmakers, especially ones with who are from Eastern Europe or were Jewish, were trying to stand up against Nazism, right? And historically, that is the correct thing to do. But at the time, it was controversial, right? So that's a whole other layer that people now, a great thing about archiving and even just the ability for studios and libraries to go in and inexpensively start archiving like, leftover film, or even, just like all this stuff that's back in there, and at a higher resolution, they're able to, and also corporate archiving, right? What notes, what corporate archives have survived, but you can scan those in and you can have them have text recognition. And now scholars are able to put together these, recreate these trails in a way that people couldn't at that time because they didn't have computers to organize their records. Yeah. So it's just really opened up a lot of perspective for people and it almost sounds intimidating in what I said, like you don't need to study history to appreciate a movie, but it's like a cooking show. You're learning about the flavors going in. Why did somebody pick cardamom, over
it's
cinnamon?
Funny you use food as an analogy, because I'd made I'd written a post on Twitter to a response to something that the Beyond Fest Twitter page had posted about how the stocks of all the big studios are going down because they're relying on streaming so much. And I said, well, the convenience that streaming gives you is it's convenient, but convenience doesn't equal success always. And if we let if we treat cinema like fast food, that we're not going to get the nutrients that it has to offer. Like, it's got so much to offer that we're not allowing ourselves to open ourselves up to, because we're just trying, the way it's served to us now is to get in and out and not really even think about watching it again, maybe, unless it's a big, comic book movie or something like that. They want them to come back for that. But anything small or anything, it's like they're not advertising. That's why they got it's about collecting the most content, and not, spotlighting good stuff.
How many episodes do you have to cover that topic? But it's one of the things that I see come up over and over again are business people, or financial reporters trying to tell the media stock story simply. And the simplest way, I think, to approach it right now is that if you are going to spend more money than you are bringing in, your stock should go down because it is not profitable, right? It's so freaking simple. But and I'll try to tell this as quickly as possible, but HBO was one of the most profitable corners of entertainment because they would create, like let's call it 2008, right, or 2009. They would create prestige shows and they would spend a lot of money, but it was one day a week, right? You'd have The Sopranos or whatever, right? The Wire. That was one day a week.
Yeah, Sunday nights typically. And the HBO owned that
and
night.
The rest of the week was catalog, right? It was older movies, and also when they would have original shows, it would be softcore, right? Like Taxi Cab Confessions.
Yeah.
And
we talked a lot about that, how over the last 5 to 10 years, they got rid of all of that and transformed their image for more public consumption.
Yeah. But what they left behind, right? Like you didn't, Skinamax was called Skinamax, but when HBO started to measure what people said they watched versus what they actually watched, they decided that they no longer were interested in that information, right? Because they didn't want to advertise that people were, they were getting it for The Sopranos, but they were watching Taxi Cab Confessions. And that, from a business perspective, doesn't matter because they're paying the premium amount of money. Now, when Netflix came in and they started to charge for the streaming and left the DVD and Blu-ray business behind, the rental business, at first they had, if you were on, I don't know if either of you was on Netflix streaming in the early years.
I was right there when it adopted, what was that, 2011, 2010-ish?
They started in 2007 or 8. You could buy a Roku because a Roku was a spinoff. And I was a very early adopter because I had a DSL account and I already had Netflix. So I'm like, you mean I can get this box and for no additional money, I can see Transmorphers as many times as I want, the Asylum classics, right? But then when they started to rely on it, they wanted to become more like HBO. And so they've made a House of Cards, et cetera, et cetera. But then by ignoring the back end, and when everything becomes Sopranos, now it's eating into your profitability. And when AT&T took over and started to refocus HBO on being Netflix's copy of HBO, costs go up. So their costs are up, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's that simple.
The streaming wars, I'm using that in quotes,
these are rabbits fighting
probably
each other.
Boosted everything when it comes to production costs. Streaming, they pumped so much money into streaming. I think all of the major studios have done that in some way, shape, or form. The only major studio that is still a relative free agent seems to be Sony. They don't seem to have really their own streaming service. Universal has one now with Peacock. Disney, of course, the juggernaut that it is, has it. Warner Brothers has HBO.
What about Lionsgate?
Paramount.
Lionsgate.
Li-
Lionsgate's a
Lionsgate is
smaller player.
indie. So
It is relative to indie.
Sony
yes.
was first out with Crackle, and Crackle was AVOD.
Yes.
Crackle, they got rid of Crackle. My understanding was that they were having a hard time selling ads because they didn't have an in-house ad agency, right? Because you need to have sales guys to fill the time. And so that's why AVOD right now is making the most money, because again, it's focusing on catalog and they're selling ads. And that's the business that all the cable people are comfortable with. And it's going to be almost like it was before. AVOD will be the last tier, like a movie will go from probably theatrical because it's the most profitable, right? Surprise, people are showing up to movies. And then, kind of TVOD is the next one, right? Transactional. So it's like you pay for a rental or you buy the thing, then SVOD, then AVOD, right? And cable is still in the AVOD zone. And so that's how they're gonna make money, but they can't, just as we were all saying, it's like you can't just keep putting money into the problem and expect quality to save the business.
Yeah, and this kind of transitions, I guess, over to the physical
Right.
side. I was actually going to this is actually a transition I'm having in my head where when you're pumping so much money into the digital streaming world and all that stuff like we've seen, there are repercussions of that. They got to take money from somewhere to balance it all out. And that's where a lot of things have affected the physical media world, where a lot of collectors like us and enthusiasts are worried about the state of physical media. You always hear of that, where it's going, how long is it going to last? Is the 4K UHD world the last gasp of the physical media on disc format? And it's interesting how we're talking about Warner Brothers. You're working for Warner Archive, and I know you can't get into all of the aspects of it, but that is one of the major collector niche brands that I think's taken a larger hit than most. Early on in this podcast, when we started, it was right around the time where the fluctuation within Warner Archive, we didn't know where it was going to go. The website disappeared. The where you could buy them kind of was shifting around in terms of the products, and we didn't know, hey, at what point is this announcement going to be the last announcement from Warner Archive? And here we are relatively 2 years later, and things are still afloat there. So it's very interesting how this all connects financially with
Right.
us.
So just, and I'm just like, running straight into an interview, to just be clear, I no longer work with Warner Brothers. If anybody wants to hire me, I'm available. But I'm doing some other things, but yes, I'm still available for any studio because I'm great. But
Nice.
But what happened was that during the pandemic, when there were a series of layoffs that mostly had to do with theatrical marketing people let go, because there were no movies to market. When you don't have movies to market, where do you put those people? Some of them could go down into streaming, but at my end, we were a specialty end, so the department was dissolved, and some of the other people were taking it. My boss is now, after a hiatus, is now back and working there. Because I don't work there right now, I can't really comment on the current state of things. But a year ago was our last Warner Archive podcast, and what you've been seeing with the brand. I mean, these are the things I can say what's known, right? The physical media releases during the pandemic for all of Warner Brothers, the main retail stuff has moved along with Universal's into a new physical media joint venture, and they get essentially first pick, right? Like because that's the stuff that's going to go into Best Buy and Walmart, like where you could, Barnes and Noble, where you could go in and pick up a physical copy. The manufactured on demand method that me and the other people in the unit had pioneered, and we're really pretty much the only ones to find great success with at the studio level. And by the way, I always like to, especially for people who are interested, it started as being manufactured on demand, but then it more became assembled on demand, right? So for the business, it's like we didn't have any returns because it's kind of like Toyota, right? Just in time delivery. All the parts would be in a warehouse, and that part may have come off of a spindle, or it may be manufactured on the premises. Some of the DVDs were mix and match. And then when an order would come in, a cover would be printed, the disc would be picked, and then it's assembled, and now it becomes a piece of stock and it's out, right? So that's how Warner Brothers alone was able to have these quantities, right? Specialized numbers going out, and there was never anything out of print. And a big piece of our business too was taking old retail discs and re-ingesting them into our system, and then having them become now available on demand. So again, you wouldn't see it in a Walmart or a Best Buy, right? And that was always shrinking, but you could get it in some specialty stores, right? You could there are always a few places where they would stock them, but they couldn't return them. That's the difference. And that, because you mentioned before, I did a book and we sold out of our book, but the books, some books came back. I still have like 500 of the books in a storage space, even though it's sold out, but that we rescued it because of course the book industry also collapsed earlier than, after records. It was like records, books, then movies, like in physical distribution. Mm. But all the smaller labels, they either, just because of the rights and clearances and stuff that they have and their different policies, they've been minimizing their costs in the licensing by deciding, okay, we're only going to make X amount. So they'll have the stock, but they're not going to have 20,000 unsold discs in a warehouse that they have to pay for, right?
Right.
So it's about controlling your costs and your expectations. But if you're in the hits business, right, like Universal, Warner Brothers, Paramount, they're all in the hits business. They make all these releases and they hope for, they want to make back their money, right? Make a healthy profit. But then when you make the one release that, the machine is there and can support, I call it the Harry Potters or the Lord of the Rings, right? And that's where the studio is printing money, and that pays for everything else. But our business was unique in that almost all our releases, like 92% of our releases, showed a profit. But that profit wasn't, it wasn't paying for me. I mean, look at me, I wasn't, people would be like, they'd write stuff like, hey, you guys are all golfing. I'm like, I wish. I mean, I don't golf, but I take mini golf, right? But it's a different, that business is a sustainable business. It's not a hit business. But, and this is the good news, right? That business remains within Warner Brothers. So in another studio, like at Universal, when they are like, no, we can't sell this in a Best Buy, then it might be available to a Shout Factory or a Kino, right? And they'll get a hold of the master. But Warner Brothers, hopefully, some of those masters have found their ways to third parties, or they release them in what was the sort of Warner Archive release window. That was another 5-hour answer.
Oh, no.
I know. That was very insightful. I
try to simplify.
If I could ask this, if I could ask it just for, I guess, historical time frame purposes, what was the time frame in which you worked at Warner Archive?
I started the day before the WB shop launched. And that was 2009.
Come on, man. Do you not? Yeah, I was going to say, what is when?
Yeah. I was just starting that because, like, technologically, right? And the Warner Archive officially launched 3 weeks later. And I was It had 0 full-time employees. But I was on the part of the team that was putting it up on the website. It was first only available through the WB shop. And nobody really expected that people would want to buy it, right? Like they're like, oh, these are in 2009, right? You got to remember 3 years before was the point where the DVD business was bringing in $4 billion a year. This was the high point. This was when you had the people, I mean, although the people I worked with weren't doing this, but this was when you could say, oh, they're out golfing every day, right? Because it was new and everybody was buying them. But there were still films that could not be sold at that level, right? They just felt it couldn't support it. And there were masters that were considered good enough for DVD, and they came our way. And so we made sure that there were 16:9 masters. We didn't want to go in with crappy 4:3 masters. And the guy who eventually became my boss, George Feltenstein, he had, gone in and selected and programmed these films. Fortunately, me and some other people at the WB shop end were there to help make that model work online, right? That's because it was an online only business. And what was expected, honestly, like in the first year to sell $250,000, we were hitting that like 2 months, or I think it was 100,000. Like they had projected so little that everything we did, they were like, whoa. And amazing. So, yeah. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't hard because I was like, hey, let's make a newsletter. That was me, right? And I was like, yeah, because I get newsletters from, from video stores. Like I'm on those lists, or from, movie theaters that were, like LA has a bunch of movie theaters that would show old and new movies, art house cinema, and they're promoting their releases every week. I'm like, well, let's just do, I didn't invent anything, right?
Yeah.
And then when social media came along, Warner Brothers was, they didn't want to talk to consumers because their fans, right? Their customers were movie studios or Best Buy, right? Best Buy is supposed to talk about it. But I was like, I've been involved in the internet from like the early days. I'm like, well, the best way to talk to your consumer is to be online and answer. And so we carved out, nobody else was really allowed to do it, but we carved out the ability to actually answer questions. And so the podcast, which launched, was originally just classic radio shows. And then I pitched to my boss at the time, who then got George on board, like, why don't we just take the newsletter and do that, right, online? And so that's how that format was done. And that took like a few years. And now all of a sudden, Warner Archive started becoming really profitable and started to have people working for just that little bit full time. But that took like 2.5 years, right? It was just a part, it became more over time, it became more and more. But, when we started going I was like, let's go. Oh my God. So the first time, 2009, I said, hey, let's go to Comic-Con. And the answer from the people who were technically in charge of the marketing were like, old movie fans don't like science fiction. And I'm like, what? Who are you?
Yeah.
Like, it's right now. That's also the difference between physical media and physical media collecting and the consumer, like DVDs, Blu-rays, and even 4K as a regular consumer staple is, DVDs will continue to sell because there's a market for it, because people know they can put a disc in there and they don't have to have high-speed internet, right? Like just like a CD, CDs still sell. They still, like mainstream CDs, not to the degree, right? And albums sell, right? Like vinyl, they can't make enough vinyl. Like there's a vinyl shortage. There's always been, people are pulling those old machines out. People are fighting to press vinyl. Now, that's because of consumer, right? Even though, and sometimes they come with a download code. Some people may never play their vinyl, but that's a physical media consumer. So what is the future of discs, right? Like it's a collectible, and it is a way that you can interface with something you love or want to discover. And it should be a premium. Well, again, there's levels of premium, but that's why the specialty labels who do the best they can with the elements that they get, that's why they put on tons and tons of extra features, because that's them kind of convincing you that this is a worthy product of your consideration. And they tell the story of the movie on it, which is fascinating. Even a terrible movie can have wonderful stories, right? And that becomes part of the entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that a lot with, a lot of what Vinegar Syndrome does, and Severin.
Vinegar Syndrome and Severin are fantastic.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah. And so many movies that you might not have ever thought to look at.
No.
But, yeah.
And it sucks you right in.
Yeah, it does.
And Warner Brothers, we were lucky that we were putting all of our money to making the best master we could, right? So we didn't put as much on extras, but that was because we had access to the source material, right? If you're third party, you have to do the best you can. Now, Vinegar Syndrome, especially, and actually like pretty much all those guys now have their own 4K scanning equipment because the costs have come way down, and they can do a great job. They know their audience, and they can take muddy prints or whatever and get beautiful results out of it. Stuff that the studios would never attempt.
There's some stuff that's just shot on video stuff from the 90s that they're able to clean up, and there's not even a film element. It's like tape.
Yeah, it's like tape.
They're like magicians, right?
Yeah, it's really becoming incredible in terms of the technology, what you can do versus what you could do 5 years ago. And what is interesting, you're mentioning all of that, and right now what I've been seeing trending wise when it comes to physical media is, while the bigger studios are kind of trending down a bit when in terms of emphasizing their physical media of the movies that they're putting out, there's a significant rise in the boutique indie market when it comes to this, like not only amongst collectors, but just the buzz and what people are talking about is Warner Archive, Kino, Indicator, Vinegar Syndrome, Severin, all of these other indie studios that are just kind of filling that gap for just discussion on social media, pop culture. And what is interesting is the reason why I asked you why time frame wise when it came to Warner Archive is because just the history of Warner Archive, which you probably know way more than I do, but just living in it as a consumer, is the DVD era, and then in 2012 I believe was when it made the transition to Blu-rays.
Yeah,
and then it wasn't really until 2015 or so where Warner Brothers basically says, like, we're just going to release our catalog stuff through you guys at the time, Warner Archive, where for the most part their big stuff they still release mainstream with the Warner Brothers staple on it. Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind will probably all have that. Citizen Kane. Well, Citizen Kane is now more indie, but at the time it was mainstream Warner Brothers. And the reason why, and I want to ask you, what was that transition like at that time when it came to, did you just get more workload now because you have even more catalog stuff you have to go through?
So behind the scenes, what happened was Time Warner sold the Time part in 2014. And Rupert Murdoch had a lunch with the guy who was CEO of Time Warner and offered to buy the company at I think it was $55 a share. Now, why do I know this? That's a good question. I never paid attention to business news until I got health insurance from a big business. And all of a sudden, right, you guys, you know how to, I'd focus on this stuff, but I took my focusing on history and culture skills, and I started to read business press because now it affected me personally. So I'm reading it, and I remembered that Rupert Murdoch leaked that story, and I was in the office in New York, I was there because at the time I had some wonderful autonomy and was able to negotiate some deals in New York. Like I got Warner Archive stuff in the back of Kindle books, right? Like I was going into New York publishing houses and they were like, we have a Barbara Stanwyck book coming out. And I'm like, I got Barbara Stanwyck on DVD. So I personally make like an ad and I'd get it in the Kindle. And I was like, woo, we're rolling. And we were part of digital distribution at that point, which was the kind of more experimental business end. But when Roops made his announcement that he was interested in buying the company, the people who ran Time Warner did not want to sell it at that. That was not part of their plan. So according to the Wall Street Journal, this isn't, this is all documented. Jeff Bukes ran out of the lunch, kept his mouth shut, and didn't say anything until Rupert told the Wall Street Journal that he wanted to buy the company. So what happened? Layoffs, because they wanted to pop the stock up. And they eliminated the WB shop from Warner Brothers. Now, I had moved over into Warner Archive. So 80% of the people I worked with got laid off. I kind of got lucky. And we all moved into Warner Home Video. We switched divisions. And that happened like midway through 2015. We had already been figuring out how to release Blu-rays, right? Because we had to figure out how to, they had to be manufactured in a separate place. We would not, we tested, but we did not feel BDRs were the technology, like all this stuff behind the scenes. And we had just launched a streaming service, which was the Warner Archive Instant, it was called at first, but Warner Archive streaming service, which was the first studio SVOD service. And we did it with no additional employees. So I had 3 jobs at that point. And then they let 80% of the people go. Now the WB shop still existed, but it was run by an independent business. But now we did not get kind of money or credit for selling through our own shop, right? Like we would tag social media posts and see if people clicked on it. And then we could see how many discs were sold by a post, which is something that nobody else really had or was tracking. And so when we go into these meetings with the Lord of the Rings people, and they'd be spending like, $100,000, right, on like digital campaigns, and we'd be like, yeah, well, this guy just made a Facebook post that made $5,000, right? And they couldn't say that because because you could always just say, well, what does this really do, right? From a marketing standpoint, someone can always come in and be like, well, do you really have an effect? Does going to Comic-Con really sell discs, right? And sometimes as a marketer, you have to go, oh, right? I mean, people are talking about it, right? But you guys are a good example of somebody who started following what we did. And then when you became interested in a disc, may have triggered a purchase, right? And if you made 3 purchases a year, you were worth more than somebody who signed up for a streaming service. Because if you bought it through the WB shop through a 4 for 44 sale, we made even more money, right? My little division. So this is all like kind of a stew of reasons, right? And it's very hard to explain. And now, that's like 7 years in the past. So I'm not revealing any industry secrets or anything but now, because that's called direct-to-consumer marketing, and it's now the hottest thing at the studios. They're like, we've never done this before. And I'm like, I've been doing it, for 12 years. But that was a huge cultural change within the studios, marketing directly to a consumer. In the history of trailers were just really made, you basically give it to a theater, right? Like the theater used it to advertise to their own patrons to come back. You were giving them, they were the audience for a trailer, right? Apple changed that when they made their QuickTime page, one of the most brilliant moves of a technology company, because they're like, what video can we show what ads can we show that people like, right? And that's movie trailers. And that was the first big thing that people voluntarily went to do. You'd go to the Apple landing page. This is like 2002, right? This is now freaking forever ago. But now all of a sudden, the movie trailer became a direct-to-consumer ad. I mean, they made TV trailers, which were different, but but it still was on behalf of the ticket sales, So it just, I mean, there are so many things I said which are simplified, right? But it just gets so complex. So anyway, to go way back in 2015, what you noticed and what you could sort of get is that there was a change. And that change was this behind the scenes, totally obscure divisional shift. And so by bringing us into that, then it became, okay, here are the traditional catalog salesmen. And at that point, there was a deal. When I came in, we were just finishing up a deal with Paramount. And so the other team had released all like the Jerry Lewis movies. And so the only reason why I say that is after that team had left, I got a big box of Jerry Lewis deluxe sets signed by Jerry Lewis, which I've been doling out to people over the years. I'm like, would you like this Jerry Lewis signed Blu-ray? And they're like, he's dead. I'm like, I know. And this has been sitting in a box under my desk for 5 years. But nice. But it's a complex business. And to make all those little parts work, it needs actually a lot of labor. And it needs to be integrated, which they now call integrated marketing. My title doesn't reflect any of that. It doesn't reflect anything, actually. Note to people reading my resume. But but as layoffs would occur and there are less and less people, there'd be less and less people trying to keep this machine running, right? And like any bureaucracy, some things have to go. And so, the people who are left with it now, there are some agencies, I think, working. I mean, I'm not there. I don't know. But I know that it may feel to a consumer a little mysterious, but there's, it's obvious that there's a little bit of a tone shift and a little bit of programming, but that's all in response to that the focus of the company has shifted to streaming. I mean, that's number one, right?
Yeah, that's evident. Yeah. I mean, this doesn't take, you don't take a keen eye to figure that out. And there was a definite shift over the last year.
Yeah, because that's when we left.
Ironically so. A definite shift. I mean, and I heard all of this on Twitter and stuff, so it's not anything out there where, their social media team was completely gone. So
that was me and Dan.
That was you.
Yeah, that's the social media
marketing. Team. So, I mean, and I talked about it at the time, and over the last year, I'm just like, there's no one promoting the Warner Archive releases every single month up until just recently. They would just drop out of nowhere, like out of the clouds, and they were just magically appear.
They got I don't know the specifics, but they got some people to, the newsletters. I don't think really ever stopped, I would say that's your best bet. That's the one thing, I'll toot my own horn. That's the thing that I developed, and I was able to explain to the people who were taking it over how important it was, and that's your mailing list. And this is true for any digital business. It's really your mailing list that drives sales. And you'll see a lot of people be like, oh, we just rediscovered the mailing list. Like even since the post office, it's always been true because it comes at a regular cadence. And, even if people tune out or they don't read it, usually they'll see that there's stuff coming out, right? And so it's a reminder. Not everybody goes to Twitter.
That's why there's so many people making money off of data these days. Just having our data so that they can throw stuff in our faces can drive sales. That's what that is. I mean, it's just, yeah.
And social media targeting does work. I mean, I laugh about it because I know I've dealt with it and I know the costs and stuff. And I'm like, ha, I'm immune. Click, click, click. Whoa, what did I just buy? Like I'm the friggin', and I'm like, oh, they got me. But the costs, it's strange, right? Because it's like flip-flopped. I would say some of the best like spends that I had when I was there, and counterintuitively would be print, right? And that's because nobody was spending on print. But so not only would we be able to run a Warner Archive ad very inexpensively because nobody wanted to do it. And we had the brand, right, Warner Brothers, so that would look good for the magazine. But I actually told like the woman who ran home video, she cornered me one day and was like, why are we spending, and it wasn't even that much money, X amount of money on print every year. And my answer was, if you are reading a print magazine about movies, you are 100% the person who would buy one of our releases, right?
Yeah, if you're that dedicated, you're already that invested.
And it was in our self-interest to keep that publication alive, really, right? I don't have their mailing list. Their mailing list is valuable to us. And that's how I would justify sponsoring, screenings or going to conventions, because our partners, customers are our customers, right? Like it's like, and people would come to me and they'd be like, "Oh, you want us?" I mean, literally, they're like, "Oh, because we had John Wayne releases coming out in like 2016 or 2017, and I kept getting these calls from a guy who ran rodeos, and I was like, well, John Wayne is compatible, but John Wayne on Blu-ray is not, right? The average Blu-ray consumer, like what's the overlap of Blu-ray consumers and rodeo fans? I mean, that doesn't mean they don't have Blu-ray, but I would rather spend my money on a magazine that was focused on Western movies, which actually exists, right? That's justifiable.
Yeah, there's a lot of different angles to get into the consumer's mind.
Yeah,
I
totally didn't mean to make this a Warner Archive history thing.
Well,
what are the new releases?
This is great. No, I'm about to shift to. I still a few more things about you I want to talk about before we get into Blu-rays.
But this is all good because this is all questions I personally have wondered about for years, just being, in the space of consuming all this stuff and then paying attention to the shifts. Because if like you'll notice things, especially when it comes to the history of home media on movies, the home media. And you see certain shifts not only when it comes to the format, but just like the strategy of these companies tend to shift. And I'm wondering, how does that all break down? It seems like there is literally a economic trickle-down effect to where it's like big business decisions up top end up coming down to people.
And it's a little different with somebody like Warner Archive, where a lot of these boutiques are their own separate entities.
This is a boutique within a big studio versus just a regular boutique on its own.
Yeah.
So it's even more complex when it comes to all the decisions going on.
Blessing and a curse, right? The blessing part is that, like for the newsletter, I could work with literally I think when I started, they had 1 million email addresses, right? Yeah. And so that was just, but the curse was that if somebody at that point unsubscribed, they would unsubscribe from all of Warner Brothers. So they kept being like, don't get too obscure, because if they unsubscribe from you and they unsubscribe from everybody's going to be mad at me personally, right? So it was like, so we had to come up with this tone and stuff that was like interesting enough, right? They could ignore the email, but so for the first few years it was tough, but then after 2015 we started our circulation. Like we were only going out to we never went out to more than 100,000, right? But we had about 20 or 30,000 people who would read our emails. And then I got them once they you didn't globally unsubscribe from all of Warner Brothers, thank you Salesforce. I was allowed to send to 700,000. And so we got at the end, I got 350,000 people to read our emails, every 2 weeks or 3 weeks when I would send them out, which is great to me because again, even if you're not a buyer, you just like, and you keep it interesting, and you put up events and context, and it becomes integrated marketing. They like to call it the funnel. I see the funnel differently than they do normally. It's like you capture the people there and then you make them subscribe every week. I see it as a funnel of interest. Like you get the email, it's interesting, then maybe you subscribe to social media. And then, right, like you guys are the kind of people who, when I would go to a convention and I'd meet them, I'd sit and talk about the business, right? And now, and you guys review this stuff. So then I had access to it. I could start getting you screeners. And then you would hopefully review our stuff, right? And then I'd see you on social media and you review our thing. And there's no requirement to like everything we do, but to come at it in an interesting way. And then we would promote what you guys would be talking about on our channels, right? This is something you don't see many brands do, big brands, little brands do it all the time, because that informs other people that, when we say this movie is great, okay, right. I mean, are we going to say this is terrible, right?
Yeah,
we try to tell you, I call it good or goodest, but when we say it's goodest, that means it's probably good. But if I have somebody else also talking about it, now you're backing up that we're not making it up, right?
Yeah. I think we try to be as forthcoming as as honest about what we talk about on here. If we don't like something, we say we don't like it. But we also try to give people the opportunity to choose for themselves. Like this is what we think. If you like this, you might be interested in it. So you should still check it out if you can. And that's how you should be, I think, with anything. Everybody should have the opportunity to make their own choice.
Siskel and Ebert had a funny job that was different than the job today. There were only X amount of movies coming out, every week at that time, and the studios were telling you everything is awesome, right? And so you wanted, and that's what was great about that format. At least you got like kind of 2 points of view, and they're like, man, but at least it gave you some context to cut through the marketing. Now there's so much stuff. So why even waste your time on something that's not interesting, right? Unless it's so bad it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of why I think we decided to do a show just about these boutique labels, because in a sense they curate for us to check out things that are maybe a little more obscure and a little bit more of our interest. And and there's nothing wrong with mainstream stuff. We collect that stuff too. But it's helped us discover things, and it's helped us just stay interested in it. And I mean, it's why we do it. I mean, it's why we've done this for over a year now, and it's still not boring.
That's great. And that's what's fun about it. And for me personally, what's nice is that some film festivals are starting back up again. People are going into theaters without dying. I mean, there's still people dying, but I'm anti-death. But I like people. So that I think is part of even for discs and stuff, like having meeting spaces, not just like this, but just like any event or a party, so that you can talk about this kind of stuff is so important.
Yeah, I've always wanted to. It's always been a dream of mine to have like a regular, my own regular kind of like screening of like things, double features, or like to curate my own thing would be always something fun. I would be into. But okay, so let's move this forward. I know we're getting crazy. This is an hour, and we haven't even.
Jesus.
And usually our interview section's about an hour, but I do want to get to a couple other things about you. The film you wrote on This Is Not Yet Rated. Tell us a little bit about that journey and that experience of making that.
This film Is Not Yet Rated was produced by a guy I went to college with, Eddie Schmidt. He was my film partner at film school. And he found when we moved out actually to LA together. And I took one path where I was like, gee, wouldn't it be fun to work as an on-set PA for terrible horror movies? And he took the much more sustainable career choice of he got hired at New Line Cinema. in post-production. And so we had a comedy group together. He was also a co-author along with another two other fellow alums, MJ Schmidt and photographs by Stephanie Hernstadt for the Finger Book. We had a comedy group, and when the Finger Book came out, it actually did really well. They talked about it on Howard Stern. Like, it was this little book.
That's awesome.
And we got an incredible amount of press. And, this was like 99. And what was interesting too was that all of a sudden, because Eddie had been working with Kirby Dick, the director, he was doing post, but he was more connected. And then all of a sudden people started calling us in to TV, mostly for TV for pitches. And because they didn't want to make The Finger into a show, although we did later sell that to IFC, which rejected the show when they became, there was like a 1-year period where they weren't comedy, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah. Anyway,
one thing leads to another, and he's working with Kirby Dick, and he invited me to come in, and I wrote the animated segments, and there was even more animation, which did not make it into the final film. But for that, I had to study the MPAA. And another, Dan Ferranti, who worked with me at Warner Archive, also was working for that film. So and I got the job first at Warner Brothers, and then I brought Dan on, and Jack Valenti, who was the head of the MPAA at the time, his son was working with us at the time. And he'd come into meetings and we'd be like, should we tell him that we were the ones who did that documentary? I have like comps. I did like little fake animated Jack Valenti, which didn't make a cut like into the film. But what that did is it was very interesting, not only to learn about how the MPA works, how it makes its decisions, but what does it mean? Like when you make what you might think bureaucratic business decisions, right? Just like what we were talking about, what's the trickle down effect? And the trickle down effect on that is that indie films who are not MPA signatories were treated differently than the studios when it came to getting ratings. And that film was co-funded by Redbox, not Redbox, I'm sorry, by Red Label, which was Netflix's physical media division that they had. And Eddie got to talk to Reed Hastings frequently. And he was like, don't worry, Eddie, we love the sales. And so people are going to be watching this on Netflix forever. And it's still available because they own the SVOD rights. Like they were like, well, who wants to see this on streaming, right? From like a 2007 or 8 film. But it's never not been available on Netflix, I think.
Yeah, it's a great documentary. I find it to be very educational, but also just it's not boring. Like it doesn't get so serious that it becomes unwatchable. Yeah,
that comes from the comedy background, of Eddie and mine. And Eddie's very funny, but Eddie has produced a lot of very serious things. But later he went on for Netflix. He worked in a bunch of reality comedy stuff as well.
Yeah. One aspect also that's interesting about the streaming thing too is that they're in the censorship angle of that film is that you're seeing this now thing with censorship when it comes to like just what should be shown and what shouldn't be shown to offend people. And of course right now Netflix is going through that with like the Dave Chappelle stuff, and they just put out a memo where they were like, hey, if you don't, to their own employees, if we're going to put out stuff that you don't agree with, if you don't like it, you can quit.
Right.
What do you think about that when it comes to like censorship within this streaming world where people are like trying to say, that they don't like this thing, so you shouldn't make it? The people are saying this, not some behind the scenes, MPAA people that we don't even know who they are unless you do some secret investigation like your documentary. It's like, what do you think about the people trying to censor art,
So, I'll try to stay brief. There has always been censorship.
Yeah.
right? Throughout the history of drama, what is the limit, right? I mean, it goes back to the ancient Greeks. And if you are the type of entertainer who wants to push those boundaries, right, then there will be pushback. There just will be. And that navigation has always been complex. It becomes more complex when more people have a voice, and which has generally been good for democracy. But however, when you get more people to have a more equal voice, it leads to more conflict. Like, hey, newspapers lead to, like printing. The printing press led to this Catholicism splitting. The Civil War could be like, okay, that's the printing press, right? I mean, those are not all exact, but technological leaps that allow people to express themselves lead to bigger intensity. And as somebody who's been involved in comedy for a long time, I've been yelled at since my freshman year of college, which by the way, I found my old student newspapers where people, a conservative newspaper said that an ad for the comedy group that I made, which had a frog peeing on the United States, should make us unfunded because it was an un-American activity. But that's always happened at any level. So Stephen, what you were saying is like you have to allow for certain voices, and there are, but as Netflix is a public company, so there are limits, right? And
I think they need to be. You have to be somewhat conscious and sensitive. You don't have to demean people for feeling the way that they feel. But I also think that everybody has a choice. You got so many choices these days, and people need to take responsibility for choosing whatever they're watching instead of complaining about what they can just turn off.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, it's easy to turn stuff off. If you're working on stuff, it's like, okay, yeah, you can quit. It's hard, it's inconvenient, but also you took a job with, I mean, do I agree with everything, that I've released? Like, no.
I don't agree with everything. I work for Pepsi, and I don't agree with everything that happens at Pepsi either, but it's a job. Yeah. It's a job. It's not necessarily my moral. Right. I don't put my morals into what I'm doing, selling sugary soda that gives people diabetes. I'm not, it didn't make me feel bad because it's not my choice. It's their choice that they bought it. So.
Well, right. And if Pepsi did start purposely poisoning their food,
sure,
which they do not. Here, I'm being legal for you. I've been
Please
trained
don't
by
say
legal
that.
departments, which they do not, nor have they ever, allegedly.
Yeah.
But if something like they were doing something that you willfully disbelieved in, they did something willfully, that you disbelieved in, then you can always work for RC Cola.
Yeah, I could always go and work for Chairwan, who owns RC Cola, and make a change. I could, but that's not where we're at. That's not where we're at. We're talking about ideas here.
Yeah,
and Netflix is dealing with ideas. We're talking about ideas and intellectual property, and you can decide not to listen to them ideas.
Yeah,
and
Look, movies are so divergent, and we at Warner Archive would discuss frequently. What do you do? I mean, history, people were horrible, right?
Exactly.
They will continue to be horrible. Where that line is of what's acceptable shifts every year in every context. And it is not necessarily fashionable, right? But at different eras, different things trigger people. You can use that word, that trigger them to have a response differently, right?
Of course.
I love reading stuff from the 80s. I've been rereading it. Like, I knew about it, intellectually, but reading what people have written into magazines and newspapers complaining about popular culture of the time is so revealing. Like the TV movie The Day After. it was, it's something that people don't really, it's not something that people watch all the time. I think it recently came out, like somebody remastered it and released it on home video, but it was a big moment in culture. And somebody had collected like the letters from people who objected to it, and they called it a communist conspiracy to make Americans not want to have nuclear war and have disarmament, right? And that was not an edge opinion. You do a little more research, you're like, that was a contemporary view. You shouldn't stigmatize nuclear war because it will make you less likely to stand up to the Russians.
Yeah.
Like, how weird is that?
Yeah.
You should not want nuclear war. Yeah. Just for those of you out there interested. That's an opinion you probably don't want.
But see, there's a nuance. They don't want nuclear war, but they feel that you protesting nuclear war makes us more vulnerable to nuclear war. Right? That's a hard one.
It is a circle. It is a circle collapsing on itself.
But from a historic perspective, it's hard to imagine somebody who would be morally against a movie about people getting blown up. So, and that's drama, right? And that is not comedy, which is way more nuanced. And as somebody who has done what I consider nuanced comedy, and as the needle has changed, some of it is aged well, and some of it has not, right? It's not something I would be like, I did this thing in terrible taste, today. But it's part of being in the business. It's a reality of it. So, it's not, to an employee who's upset about it, you can advocate for change, right? I don't think there's actually anything wrong with that. But
no,
publicly, that's a step unless I considered it really wrong or I felt unsafe at my workplace or something, there are limits, but it's way murky for me.
Well, as we've discovered with big business, the way you can advocate against something like that you don't believe in is with your money. So you can decide not to use Netflix, and that's how you can win.
Yeah.
But but at this point, people just like to complain.
Yeah. So, well, you don't get Squid Games then.
Yeah, you don't get Squid Game season 2 or Stranger Things 4, or so then they have to keep it just because of that. But right? Andrew, you should say something about this if you want to.
Oh, no, I don't really have a lot to say about it. It's a whole discussion for a completely different type of podcast.
I'm willing to engage anybody.
Because movies and film in general have been, cultural touchstones in terms of reflecting the times in which they're made in, and some age very well and some don't. And it shows you, it gives a reflection of the time in which the films were made. I mean, you just mentioned, Warner Brothers. It's a studio that's been around for nearly a century, and a lot of the stuff within the studio, of course, you look back on and it's like, oh yeah, that is not appropriate at the time. Things like blackface in movies, not appropriate at the time, but they did it back in the 30s and 40s.
And you're watching Harry Potter now.
Yeah. And then, they used to use blackface frequently throughout the ages, but I'm just saying that's just one example of something you couldn't do back then that if you did now would be horrific. But back then it was probably more commonplace in movies. Doesn't mean it was morally right at the time, of course, but it was something that was done. I mean, I'm always talking about when you're talking about old movies, you have to look at them within the context in which they were made at the time. And I think you need to embrace the past as opposed to
trying to cancel
ignoring
the past.
it.
I mean, it's
a lot of people. We're having a lot of big political discussions now about how we handle the things of the past, specifically negative things. I think it needs to be acknowledged, and I think it needs to be discussed and talked about, and being open about it and accepting of it in a certain way, because it happened. Things happen. I remember, just going back to Warner Brothers, since it's kind of a Warner Brothers podcast now. The old Looney Tunes cartoons, infamous. People bring this up all the time. When they put out a lot of the old Looney Tunes cartoons with a lot of the racial, horrific, racism that's in it, when it depicted, African Americans, where it depicted the Japanese people during World War II, they would put the thing in front of it saying this was made during that time, we do not condone this, all that kind of stuff. I know Matt can probably has the more definitive quote on that.
Don't send him down that trail. Don't send him down that trail.
This is what it is.
I have so much to say.
This is the way it was, and this is how we're presenting it to you, the way in which it was at the time. You need those types of acknowledgments to move on. Today's a lot more interesting because, like we said, social media has changed everything when it comes to public discussions and public forums. Lots of negativities, a lot of good things as well, and it's a hodgepodge of insanity. I think Twitter is the wild, wild west of social media. It is an insane place with no real laws
They're
anymore.
trying to tame it, but it's still pretty wild.
Yeah, and I mean, it shows you the depths in which humanity kind of goes to when it comes to certain thoughts and things. Yeah. It's like, maybe some of this stuff should not be out there in the world at this time. I mean, when it comes to comedy is different because, like you said, Matt, it's so nuanced and so detailed. It's probably the most subjective entertainment genre or artistic genre we have because you don't know what's funny to one person is funny to another. And, the stuff we said 10, 20, 30 years ago was funny at the time, but in hindsight, it's probably not because we actually have more information now about the subject matter in which these jokes were being told. You could make, for example, I've been open about it. I've dealt with cancer throughout my life and whatnot. And, Family Guy made cancer jokes like 20 years ago, and it's like, it's not really offensive. And it's just interesting the way in which the context is going. And then who knows what happens if cancer gets cured in the next 10, 20 years, then those jokes are not going to really matter. Yeah. It's just the culture is changing, society is changing, information is changing. We know more about certain issues now than I think we've ever done before, and we're learning more all the time. So our culture keeps changing, and we have to look back at the past and being and
try to learn from it as much as possible.
Not getting rid of it. I don't think getting rid of it is going to help anybody. I think analyzing it and growing from it is a better way to go about it.
I just feel lucky that I can pull out all the old polio jokes now that nobody has it. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It was just but that actually, when you said that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's funny, right? Because then the context of it is stripped away, and now you'd have to be well, I'm just using polio. Millions of children were crippled with polio before the fact, and that would have been really distasteful then, right? Now I'm just saying it because it's a historic curiosity. And I mean, fortunately, there are people who still are alive that have had polio and had to live with that their whole lives, but it's just one example of how is it presented in the moment, and how does it age over time? And again, not to really go into it, but and this is something I learned early on in studying film history, because it was confusing at first, and now I really see it a little more in light. I call it the birth of a nation problem, because you could, it is historically significant as arguably the first feature film, right? But you can't really study it as that without understanding the context and the historic significance of it. And it's long, something with that message was so effective that it literally affected history, right? In a very negative and easy to research way. The people who, it's just so complex. You can't separate it from that. So you have to watch another DeMille movie or something.
Well, yeah, films back then also had a different effect on people.
Sorry,
because I said DeMille because it was so new. People really didn't. It was so interesting. But what is interesting about mentioning, that's always a hot button issue, Birth of a Nation. But that movie can be both historically significant for cinematic history, and also be a horrific racist document that has had massive cultural effect since then in terms of spurring racism and stuff like that. They use that movie to indoctrinate people into racism, to this day. And it's it can be both of those things. That's how nuanced cinema can be. It can be both good and horrifically
But
bad.
when you're going to like Cinema 101, all right, so we're going to spend the next full year on the first film, first feature film. What did Griffith mean by that? I mean, like, it's like they took, because of that movie, I pretty much where it would start. And, but you could trace a line to the fact that they took all the Babylonian stuff off the Kodak Center, the mall in Hollywood, which was inspired by the movie Intolerance, because of the director, right? I mean, Babylon, ancient Assyria, not a great empire. I don't recommend following any of the precepts of it, but it's like, I guess the point is that Birth of a Nation is still affecting things in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Like how freaking straight, like that is something, but it is not, it's hard. It's hard to teach as the first feature film because it's just too complex. Yeah. Like they made this, let's move on.
They're still talking about, a movie that came out a century ago. And it's still a hot button issue discussion, and it just goes to show not everything within cinema has always been positive.
No.
A lot of it's been very, very bad.
But let's
talked about misogyny.
Let's talk about the fun stuff.
Like
well, no, I was gonna say one more transition to one more subject we need to talk about though is. You did the One Archive podcast. Now you're doing your new podcast, the Archive Guys.
Yeah, let's get to the present.
Archive Guys, and so you and your partner Dan.
Yeah.
And then I think you got, what's her name, Sarah? I believe. Kelsey. I'm sorry, Kelsey.
It's okay.
Are you three, and then sometimes you have guests on. So tell us about why the Archive Guys was born out of the ashes of the previous podcast.
Well, Dan and I missed podcasting, so. I figured, okay, well, what's something that we can't shut up about? And that would be movies. We know how to do it. And so we got Kelsey because Dan and I are two old dudes. And so Kelsey just came out of film school and moved out here like in the pandemic. And she reached out to me through my alumni network. And I was like, you want to help out with the podcast? And she's like, and then I'm like, you're on the podcast, surprise. And she grew up, her dad owned a comic book store and was is like a super physical media fan. So she is really knowledgeable in it, but it's fun to have somebody on who can come at it with a fresh perspective.
I was going to say, you have you two old dudes.
Yeah.
And then she's this fresh, knows film from a whole different perspective.
Yeah. And so we try to keep it fresh. And then we're, just like what you're doing here. We're just inviting people on and we're talking about, new releases in a way, because it's not tied in to any product, right? Like you guys, like it's like, we can talk about whatever we want. What are we going to talk about?
We really could. I mean, it is curated to a sense, the studio, although boutiques kind of give us whatever they get, but it's always something different. It's always something new and from all different facets of, we're talking about, B horror movies over here one day and next minute we're talking about the Criterion Collections, next, high art, Russian film or something. So we're everywhere.
Yeah. I think we got up to 500 episodes, right? And we would average like 7 releases per episode. So we've covered everything, right? But there's still great new stuff, and there's still great conversations to be had. And even just talking to you guys, like when you work there, I find all the stuff that is not me writing emails and going to terrible meetings interesting, right? But what's kind of fun is that other people have found those experiences interesting as well. Like, it's very rare to have a job where people are like, so how do you get on the lot so often? Like, oh, well, let me tell you how I can call up a pass. And I just invite people to lunch. I'd be like, you want to go on? It's not like that hard, right? But that's kind of the idea, is that some transparency with the process is refreshing. And even though Dan and I literally nobody except for the people making stuff nobody's on the lot right now, really. So we can talk about it online. And Archive Guys We have at this moment, I think we have 4 episodes up. I've got 2 in the can. We're just kind of leisurely releasing them.
Yeah, I was gonna say I know because I've listened to some of it so far, and I know you guys are still kind of shaping the show as you're going. It's almost very free style. The conversations go all over the place, and then Kelsey tries to bring you back in, reel you back in.
That's her job.
It's entertaining.
Sounds familiar.
It's definitely entertaining.
That sounds like Steven and I.
Well, it happens. Theirs is a little bit more. You think we're crazy? Theirs is a little bit more jazzy. It's a little jazz.
Have it to reel someone in. Steven's my, I guess.
Yeah.
Angler.
I hangle him. Yeah.
Yeah. He's the one who reels me.
My
in.
job on the Warner Archive podcast was, as I like to say, I did the wrangling. I'd send everybody the show notes, and I had to play the guy who was more the innocent on it. I would call it the problem of one of my favorite ABC after school specials of all time. I think it was 1977, called My Mom's Having a Baby. It is terrible, but they showed it to us when we were in 5th grade, and they had like a 16 millimeter copy, and a substitute was showing it to us. And so this was our you're like 9 or 10, and this was Sex Education, which was ABC after school special. And there's one moment in the film, and I thought that it was from the 60s, or I didn't know when it was from when I saw it. It just felt old. And the kid just very earnestly says, "But Dr. Flanagan," or whatever his name was, "I don't understand how the sperm got there in the first place." And everyone in the room is cringing. Again, we're 5th grade, right? And then he goes into the serious talk, which you've seen many times on different comedies. When a man and a woman are very much in love, and after they've spent a year after being married, right? Man, and then and you're just like, oh, so at the end of it, the teacher is like, are there any questions? And she was a sub, and she's like sweating. And we all look at one kid, and this kid never really did this. And he raises his hand and he goes, "I don't understand how the sperm got there in the first place." And then went like this.
Oh. It's like the kid from Kindergarten Cop.
Yeah.
Boys have penises, girls have vaginas.
But that was my job on the podcast, was to play the kid who didn't know anything. I'd be like, "Why don't you explain how restoration works on a 4K? And how do we get it to 2K?
Did you change your voice to do that?
Yeah, don't open that line, because that's
no.
We could talk about
But
that all day, I guess. Yeah, you almost opened.
That's 500 episodes. But that would be my job, and I'd Dan got feedback from some of his relatives, which is this: "I don't know why you guys have that other guy on. He doesn't know anything." I was like, it's a role.
Damn it!
Playing the role.
He's playing the guy that gets things going.
Yeah.
I'm the instigator.
Yeah, it's an important role. Is to be please explain it for the civilians at home.
Yeah. We try to do that. I probably play that role more than Andrew does.
Good,
because he's seen more than me.
Yeah,
and he usually gets prepared more for the episodes better than I can.
Somebody
so I have to be like
Andrew.
Yeah. Someone's got to watch endless hours.
I
will do that. I'll take that hit from people.
By the way, Andrew, that's exactly what I did on the Warner Archive podcast, because George had already seen everything, right? And Dan had seen a lot, and he'd be like, "Oh, looks good," and be done. And meanwhile, I'm watching 6 movies the night before and taking notes and reading everything I can. And then I get to say one sentence like, "That looked really good." And I'm like, "Whoa, I spent 4 freaking hours preparing for that."
Yeah, I'm the person. I messaged Steven at 6 a.m. this morning saying I just finished watching a movie and I liked it a lot. I can't wait for us to talk about it. That's me up all night.
Yes.
I'm the guy who's triple featuring Boris Karloff films at 1 a.m.
Yeah. Best time. The non-monster Boris Karloff movies.
Yes, the non-monster Boris Karloff stuff.
But
by the way, wait. What's your favorite non-monster Boris Karloff? Because I have a new one. A new favorite, because I just resaw it recently.
I mean, I don't know why this is popping into my head, but Targets.
That was what I was gonna say.
Movie?
That's my favorite, because he does play a monster, but he plays playing a monster. He's so playing good like
himself.
It's so good. Yeah. I love it so much.
The backstory of the way that movie was made, how they got Boris Karloff, because they just had extra time left over from another movie.
So amazing,
kind of incredible.
Yeah, we got to cover that because that was, I think, because that's Paramount. Paramount bought that from Roger Corman. So we were lucky to talk about that on DVD, but I recently saw the new HD version of it, and
it's coming. Can't wait.
It was on streaming. I saw it streaming, but it is such a fun movie. And just you said, like the story behind it, the story of Bogdanovich, the story of Roger Corman, and the story of Boris Karloff. And it's a great movie. And again, feels like, with the gun-loving assassin is very timely still.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right, to this day.
Unfortunately, something like that, which would be, an outlandish plot for a movie back in the late 60s, even though not so much.
Right, they still had, they were having snipers.
The things that were happening.
But it's still.
But it's even more appropriate now, considering the world in which we live.
Oh, yeah. All right, well, we agree on that. Let's move on. There, Targets. Watch it.
Great.
We're on the same Boris Karloff wavelength.
But okay, so before we get into Blu-ray announcements, so where's the best places that you said? archiveguys.com is where probably the best place to find all the good stuff for the podcast.
Yeah, and you can follow me at Mr. Matt Patterson. Also, here's a plug. During the pandemic, I produced and co-wrote a feature film, a sci-fi feature film, and it's on the festival circuit. Nice. And hopefully we're hopefully putting some touches on actual distribution, which should be in the fall. But the only confirmed place you can see it, and this is super nerd, if you are going to Indianapolis, Gen Con, the #1 gaming convention, non-computer. We just got into the Gen Con Film Festival, which is like us and like movies about like the art of Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. So we won the Philip K. Dick Sci-Fi Festival in New York, and we just won the Midwest Weird Fest.
Nice.
So we have there's a good pitch for you. It's a Philip K. Dickian sci-fi weird fantasy for anime and gamer crowd.
Okay, well, when's the disc coming out?
Oh, when I talk to distribution, they're like, well, we don't handle physical media. And I'm like, oh, don't worry, I'm handling physical media.
I got this.
So I will send you guys a copy. I don't know if I can get it on Blu-ray, because it's gonna come out of my pocket. But sure. I will have a DVD, and I plan, almost as a joke, to have like 6 commentary tracks.
Cool, do it. Yeah, I can't. You got enough energy for all 6, I think.
I want to do one with like a dog, just like whimpering.
Well, I got my cat here.
Yeah,
my
your cat is. I'm going to line up. Zoom it in.
We'll do it. But awesome. Great.
That's all I'm up to. The end.
That's great. All right. Well, so Andrew, you ready to? Let's move into some announcements from this past week.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have to bring me down the trail, because I think you're a little bit probably more prepared when it comes to which things we're supposed to talk about. I know we're going to talk about some Severin, and I know some Umbrella Entertainment is on the list here.
Yes, we are. A couple of individual ones to start off with, but like I've said in the past, this was a very light week. Probably the lightest week in comparison to a lot of the other lighter weeks we had. Very quiet. But there were a couple of things from overseas I wanted to talk about. Specifically, the biggest personal one for me, and I've been waiting for something like this for many years, is Studio Canal is going to be releasing Orson Welles' The Trial on a 4K UHD Blu-ray release, which is great for us because it'll be region free, so we can play it here no problem. I know there's a new 4K restoration of the film itself, which is fantastic. I don't know if it's going to be playing in like movie theaters or stuff like that. I'm not even sure when this is supposed to come out, but it says later this year, which is a big old. Could be.
And you said Studio Canal, right? Is putting it out.
Studio Canal, yes.
Yeah, because I have the Blu-ray Studio Canal which is decent. It's and it's not a great release in the sense of its packaging. It's like literally just like almost like a book. Like it didn't even have a cover for the.
It's been around
very
for a
thin,
long time. That release, I remember looking at that release probably a decade ago. Like it was the only way that movie has been released on Blu-ray at all, because it doesn't have a Blu-ray release here in the United States, which is
it's crazy.
Kind of wild to me, because all of Orson Welles' stuff has been getting consistent Blu-ray releases over the last decade or so. Specifically, a lot of it's through so much Warner Brothers on my head. A lot of it's through Criterion.
And now the 4Ks are coming, because like Citizen Kane now already, and of course Touch of Evil just got a Kino.
Yes, it did. It just got a Kino 4K release. I still have my original Warner Brothers straight big deluxe collector's edition set, which I bought a decade ago. It was the Amazon exclusive, which came with the DVD version of Magnificent Ambersons. And it was, people were buzzing more about the Magnificent Ambersons than I think about Citizen Kane. And then, of course, Magnificent Ambersons got a Blu-ray release years later by Criterion, which I happily upgraded to. But this is a big one for me because, like I said, just my personal love of Orson Welles and his films. And so I'm lucky to have this. This movie is starring Anthony Perkins and Jean Moreau is in the film, Rami Schneider. It's a trippy movie. Trippy movie. If you want to see something that's extremely avant-garde, very surreal, in an Orson Welles way, and he's in the movie at one point playing a character. It's about a trial, obviously since the title of the movie, of this Anthony Perkins character, but you go down this wild, crazy, existential, weird type of journey that he's going on with this quote-unquote trial. And it's an incredible film. I think I may have watched it on Netflix a long time ago.
Man, we're plugging Netflix so much on this episode.
I don't know why. It just happened to be
Netflix and Warner.
In the early days, when before Netflix was doing their original content, they just had stuff from everywhere and from everyone. They didn't really discriminate, and now it's just like mostly their catalog stuff. But this is something I can't wait to get.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you. Matt, anything about the trial?
Well, just a few little things. Netflix picked up SVOD rights very early because it became a new category, and the salespeople were like, "Oh, you want it, right?" And so they didn't know how much it was worth. So Netflix, it was such a great time because they just got all this stuff kind of dumped into them, and when there were HD, what were called like TV masters, which would be a little different than what would come out on disc, but they would put out stuff that was like, a 1080i, right? That's Amazon has tons of crappy old 1080i's still on it because there's a whole ingestion cost issue. This is the whole problem with digital, is like a lot of vendors don't like to upgrade the stream because they have to there's like it costs them like a few $100 and they're like, meh, right? Moving on to the trial, Orson Welles, is 6 PhD theses wrapped up inside 28 PhD theses, right? But this is like a great example of like a Kafkaesque journey, and how do you put that on film? Well, Welles went to Europe, right? They were willing to give him money, and that's sometimes why these releases aren't as available, because the rights are...
Sometimes they create a company just to fund the one movie, and then it's gone. That company's gone, and then it's like...
If anyone is interested in kind of the history of Orson Welles' career, there are many documentaries, and his career was so wild in terms of how he tried to just get these movies made by any means necessary. He was just taking any acting jobs to make money to fund his movies, like, because he couldn't get any money from the studio system. They basically exiled him for a good part of his career.
We have those movies. I don't work there anymore, but Warner Archive had those movies on DVD. It's like, I did this for the paycheck so I could make the trial movies, which are also kind of fantastic, because he just sits there and is a barbarian but I mean, because he's an incredible presence wherever. But yeah, it's a result of those financing situations, 50, 60 years later, is that it's hard to track down, the elements, and it's hard to get the rights together. Like, this is an example of something that's been released. I'm looking at, if you look at the IMDb company credits page, it's like 30 companies released versions of this, right?
Yeah.
And that just says disaster for finding the best available master things to master from. But people do it, and then it becomes news, right? And then they'll probably have like a new 2 or 4K scan that they can put on streaming too and make money that way as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've talked about people who go on like worldwide quests to hunt down elements for releases of movies, and you always hear about, I don't know if it was for Orson Welles specifically. I don't know if it was Othello or Chimes at Midnight or something, where someone had it like in their personal home archive from like a family member for like decades. They had 35mm print or 16mm print or whatever elements, and these just kind of pop up every now and then. And like we said, with Orson Welles' stuff, who owns it, who has it, it just, no one really kind of knows, because you just lose track of it over time. It's not like now where you have archives and databases that kind of are trying to wrangle these things in.
And even when you have, right, like archives, Universal had their fire, right? Like that doesn't even mean that they're necessarily safe, because things happen, right? So it's such an interesting detective, like where's that procedural TV show about the archive detectives?
It's waiting for you to fund it. It's waiting for you to fund it and start.
I got $10.
Start that Kickstarter.
All right. That's next.
So moving on from there, sticking with Studio Canal, they're releasing, completely shifting gears when it comes to every dynamic, is Red Sonja, which is, I believe, a spin-off movie from the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan the Barbarian films. Straight 80s fantasy comic book stuff. And this is getting a 4K release from Studio Canal. And it says available July 18th. There's already a trailer for it up to, I guess, check out the new restoration and stuff like that. And it's an official announcement from them. This stars Arnold Schwarzenegger. Bridget Nielsen is in the film as well, I believe, as Red Sonja. This is a cultural staple, I guess, for a lot of people of that era. And originally, I know the original Conan film was directed by John Milius, and then he wasn't brought back to really do anything when it came to the sequel, which was unfortunate, because the first film kind of had his passionate stamp all over it. But this is an interesting release. It's probably going to sell well for a lot of fans. It's a genre thing from the 80s. The 80s are... they never really go away when it comes to their popularity. No. It's just...
The 80s
like, even the schlockiest stuff is popular.
The 80s is the new 60s.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel, but the 90s is where right now sort of the catalog cutting, mainstream cutting edge. But even we're seeing like pre like 2004, because that's like, it's like 20 years is usually the nostalgia breaking point, but 15 is like that. But the real line in the sand is going to be like the SDHD element, like when did digital cameras like go in and stay on the set, film elements, like and television, it's way more obvious, because it's like all of a sudden everything's 4:3 and then everything goes wide, which I just have to point out that Friends was not shot in widescreen, even though it streams in it. That's a
Oh, don't get me going about aspect ratios. I'm an aspect ratio fiend, purist, enthusiast. Nothing gets me going more than wrong aspect ratios.
I like to send Andrew just shots of
things
movies
cut off
that are
the
just
frame,
cut off frame just to piss him off.
Widescreen shots that are done exhibited in 4:3,
Yeah.
so characters are half off the screen.
Yeah.
So,
You're welcome, Andrew.
I haven't released a podcast yet. But I like to read letters. We don't get physical letters anymore, which is sad. I used to insist that people write to the Warner Archive podcast by mail because I figured it would filter out the crazies, but it didn't. It actually funneled them right in, but it was so much fun to just open the mail and read. But we got an aspect ratio question, and I'll tell it very briefly, Andrew, because you are the audience for this story. The absolute most modern aspect ratio travesty, this would be like 2019, right? 2018 or 2019. I got on a plane. I'm looking through because I always check and see what's going to be playing on the seat in front of me. And I go, oh, Rebel Without a Cause. Oh no. And then I think, oh no. And I hit it. It was the 4:3 Rebel Without a Cause, it's a widescreen film, stretched.
Oh no.
Oh, double worse. So it was letterboxed zoomed. Oh my god. And Rebel Without a Cause is in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. So that's even
so he
more
might
of a
have
dagger
to
to
end the
heart.
podcast now. He's
I don't know. I may need to take some time.
Is that is like just like
that's the saddest thing, especially 1956. That movie came out, and widescreen CinemaScope was just starting to become a thing.
See, Andrew, you are the target.
What a blasphemous thing.
Andrew, I watched the whole thing because it is a testament to the film, even with James Dean fat, like stretched and cropped in the worst way. Movie's still good, right?
I was gonna say, and now it's his preferred way to watch it. He watches it in that way.
Yeah. I'm like, can I recreate that at home?
Yeah.
hence Red Sonja. The end.
Yeah.
It's Red Sonja.
Red Sonja, it's okay. Like I'm not a huge fan of that type of genre of kind of like, barbarian epic type of film. They're okay. It's fine, but it's not really my bag. So
yeah, I mean, Conan the Barbarian has been such a character that's been around for a very long time when it comes to books, comic books. They're doing comic books now with Conan the Barbarian in it. Marvel has the rights back to it, but I think they're losing the rights again. I don't know. I saw an article the other day, but either way, they've been trying to get that Conan the Barbarian thing going when it comes to movies and whatnot. They had the Jason Momoa movie. What was that, 2000, early 2000s, 2010s? Wasn't a big hit. I don't know. It's an interesting thing, but people, obviously Arnold Schwarzenegger was one of the kings of 80s action movies, so iconic at that time with not only Conan the Barbarian, Terminator, Predator, Commando. You throw Twins in there for some comedy, a favorite of mine. So it's rated in that range. It's going to sell well because people are big fans of him in that era. I think it's going to do well.
Yeah. I'm a fan of like Italian swords and sandals movies. So like my new recontextualization of the Conan films is like, okay, let me pretend that this is a knockoff, a branded knockoff of an Italian swords and sandals film. Then the movie's good. You're like, oh, this is much better than a regular swords and sandals movie. And Red Sonja is more like a swords and sandals movie than Conan is. But Red Sonja, they rebooted the TV series. Like they made a TV series 10 years ago, and that's also one that they keep announcing is going to be a movie again.
Oh yes, yes they did.
And it never has quite launched. So, and that's because of the Robert E. Howard estate is working to keep that stuff going. So that's why you're also talking about the rights and clearances. Conan's a classic pulp character. He got in an era when post Star Wars, the studios started going in and dusting off the pulp characters to different various levels of success and failure. Flash Gordon is 1980 is I consider a high watermark of some people would consider that not a great movie, but it's a wonderful knockoff Italian film made by British people Like that's how I like to see it. Again, it might as well. One of my, now I'm really veering, but one of my hopes, and I keep pitching it to people for free, is somebody could make Flash Gordon the musical with like Queen, put that on Broadway. I would fly to
amazing.
New York and see that, like, because it feels like a musical, right? So like these over the top 80s things, if you see it in that way, then they're fun, right? But Conan, Red Sonja, they didn't make another one after that. Let's just put it that way.
It's one of them things that I mean, just the sword and sandal genre has not really ever been. I mean, like there's few exceptions, but
I mean, a lot of other genres, it's come and gone in terms of popularity. Yeah. Like the Western, was super popular for decades and then kind of dissipated, made a bit of a resurgence later on, and has taken on a few different forms in terms of mixing genres and whatnot. And then Sword and Sandals, I think, had a big resurgence in the 2000s. Gladiator
Ridley
put
Scott
Sword and
made
Sandals
it
back on the map.
pretty clear that
Ridley Scott brought it back. Yeah, you got that, and then Kingdom of Heaven is more medieval type stuff, but you understand, kind of that.
And I see like a lot of post-apocalyptic movies is like one step removed from Swords and Sandals, right? Because it's like there's usually a desert, right? Yeah, it's a Swords and Sandals movie. So, and they're one step to the side, like it's an Italian Western that isn't shot in Spain for America, right? Like those are the budgetary and the creative reasons, but they're fun genre films. And if you're in the mood, there's I have lavished praise over movies much less technically competent.
Yeah.
Very much so. But moving on from there, we'll stick in relatively the same era of movies with there is going to be a release by 101 Films of Rock and Roll High School, which came out in 1979. This is a movie that I only saw recently over the last couple of years, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, because Shout Factory had put out a Blu-ray release of this recently, and it is it's co-directed, or it's directed by Alan Arkush, and then Joe Dante was involved in it as well. And I just thought this was an interesting premise for a movie. It's kind of like an odd version of Grease to a certain extent, because there is music involved in it. It's set at a high school, obviously Rock and Roll High School. Basically, the Ramones are coming to town, and people are kind of going bonkers over the Ramones coming to town. And it came out in 1979, so it's right in that punk rock era, right around that time. And it's a really fun kind of cult movie for that time, and I really dig it. And 101 Films is putting out another Blu-ray release of it. I'm not sure when it comes to the difference when it comes to special features between this and the Shout Factory release. It does say here it's getting a 4K scan from the original camera negative. I have to assume that this has got to be the similar master to what Shout Factory just put out, unless they're going straight to a brand new one. I don't think so.
Yeah. But it's a fun movie, and like you said, I mean,
it's a Roger Corman film.
Yeah.
For those of you interested at home, it's a Roger Corman cult classic, and it's definitely worth a watch if you like Roger Corman.
I like when movies have a kind of films like Detroit Rock City, or like something like when we both discovered Times Square, where there's like this.
Oh yes.
The films that decide to kind of pinpoint pop culture in a very direct way, where it gets down to like our level, and like tries to connect with us about how we see that stuff, and not necessarily the wider scope, like just on a ground level of like how you can get really excited about a particular band or a particular movie that's about to come out, or like get our even some of them. What's the movie about the Star Wars fans that go and try to get on George Lucas's ranch? That movie.
Oh my.
What's that called? Come on, Matt.
Oh no. Fanboys.
That movie.
That's what
Heavy Metal Parking Lot.
That's the other one. But like it's movies where it gets on the ground level of the fan and sees our perspective is always something I really love. So I'm Rock and Roll High School, it's great. Matt, please.
Yeah.
Any
I do want to clear something up. So the Rock and Roll High School Blu-ray release from Shout Factory was 2010. 2010, but they did do a 40th anniversary edition in 2019 Steelbook. And I don't know if that has a new, if that had a new transfer on it. Oh, it does. Brand new 4K restoration from the original camera negative. So they re-released it in 2019. Because I was about to say 2010.
That's a long
jump. Time ago. That's ancient times.
Corman's library is kind of fascinating to study because Corman himself did not really foresee the value of home entertainment, really. Like it was something that he kind of adamantly didn't calculate into his business plan. And I have had the fortune, actually, of going through in the pandemic. I've been studying a lot of Corman and his business history for another project, which I didn't talk about, but it's actually, I'm working on a TV thing about making low budget movies in 1979. And so Rock and Roll High School is actually part of the research, that I encountered, and the stories of Alan Arkush and Joe Dante from this time and working for Corman are fascinating and infamous. Joe Dante and Alan Arkush talk about it all the time because they got their start there coming right out of film school in New York, and they moved out here to basically became the editors for Corman, and they were fans of his which was something that Corman didn't quite understand, that he had fans of his format, right? Which we would now call cult-like fans. Like they recognized that there was something almost rebellious about what Corman was doing outside of the system. And they demonstrated to him that they kind of understood this new emerging audience of the 70s by cutting together these crazy trailers, which did things that he would not have done. So then while they still had to edit, he allowed them to direct their first film, which was a comedy about Hollywood called, I believe it was Hollywood Boulevard. And they parodied working for Corman, but under the banner of Miracles Pictures. And it's really funny to watch when you see those guys' energy in it. And then they went off, and for Corman, and this is like around the same time period, Joe Dante did Piranha, and Alan Arkush worked on Rock and Roll High School, and had to fight to make it with the Ramones because Corman wanted it to be about disco, right? Because Corman was trying to follow the trend, and Arkush had to be like, no, not disco. Disco is not, right? It just seems so obvious now, like disco is not rebellious, right? But Rock and Roll High School is a reflection of chaos in a bottle, right? And I watched the Shout Factory release recently, and it's a great film to check out just from that raw energy. And this was the kind of thing that the studios were not delivering in 1979, and that by the 80s, right, like the teen movie, became a studio, you polish it off, and now you've got John Hughes, and people, John Hughes invented that, but no, it came out of surf movies and stuff, right? The AIP, and that bubbled up because the studios started to realize that the kinds of drive-in and teen movies, the independent movies, like Star Wars came out of a Corman-esque situation, and how can we make money? We'll make genre movies, but make them respectable or higher budget. So you got Conans, you got Red Sonjas, right? These are low budget kinds of movies. And Rock and Roll High School is like you would not get that from a studio later. So it's worth checking out a world where the misfits were almost like the winners, right? But then blew up the school. Spoiler.
Yeah, like you do. Yeah. All right, Andrew.
Yeah, so Steven, do you want to talk about the Severin film that you...
Yeah, well, we both watched it, so we need to talk about it.
We both watched it. Yeah, it is. Recently, over the last couple of weeks or so, Severin's been dropping certain hints about maybe some upcoming releases, and one specifically that they're probably going to announce officially relatively soon is All About Evil, a film from 2010. And Steven, you're the one who mentioned this movie last night. It wasn't even on my watch list for this week until the wee hours of the morning.
So they're dropping. This was because they have their mid-year sale coming up.
Yes,
and this is part of that mid-year sale, and this is the first kind of announcement they've made in the sense of what you could buy during the sale. And so, this came out in 2010, and as we do, we searched the internet to see if we can find a version of this to watch, and it was on YouTube. It was on YouTube. And,
It is.
It's once again not great quality, but it was enough to watch it. It was watchable, and I actually really liked it. And I think you agree with me.
I really dug it a lot. This movie, not to do this again to people because I don't know if people get tired of me talking about it. This is very much in my wheel. This is like John Waters' film Cecil B. Demented, but a horror version of that. So it has an interesting twist in that regard. It felt so much like it. It has that over the top vibe in it. It's got the wildness in there.
Yeah, it's got that.
For those of you who don't know the premise of this movie, first of all, the cast may surprise you a little bit, maybe not, considering the time in which it came out. So the movie stars Natasha Lyonne, who of course got her start in the American Pie films. She was in a film that I really love, But I'm a Cheerleader, which just got a Blu-ray release over the last year or so, which finally it did. And this movie also stars Mink Stoll. There's the John Waters connection right there. Like I said, Cassandra Peterson is in the film. Thomas Dekker is an actor who, at the time, in that time frame, I remember him being on I think he was on the television series Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Yes. Lena Headey. Yes. I remember the people talking about that at the time because I remember being in a sci-fi club in college at the time, and people were like, "You gotta watch the movie, you gotta watch the show, you gotta watch the pilot. It's awesome." Underrated show if anyone's interested. It's actually better than the last two Terminator movies that have come out, but that's a different discussion for a different time. But he's in the film as well, and the premise is that Natasha Lyonne's character she's kind of this mousy, kind of meekish librarian, but she has now taken over her father's kind of small repertory theater where they show horror movies. And what ends up happening is she ends up starting making her own movies by accident, but they're not fictitious movies. They're real. She's committing
like
murders.
Snuff movies.
And they're basically snuff films. And she does it by accident, and the audience reaction to it is so popular. And that she's like, "Oh, I gotta make more," so she has to.
She continues.
She gets the hunger
she gets the hunger to kill more and more people.
She gets the idea to do more, and the things get more and more elaborate in terms of, and they're short films, and they get more and more elaborate.
They become short films in the front of the features.
And they're snuff films because she's committing murder. And what happens is her character starts transforming into this snobbish.
All about
film
Eve,
auteur,
all about Eve type,
and all about Eve type. Everything starts going to her head, and it's just wild in terms of what's going on.
It also
the kills and the way they're done.
It also has the first thing that came to my mind too was that it almost kind of had a Vincent Price. Theater of Blood.
They drop so many. They drop a Vincent Price.
Yeah, they even say Vincent Price.
They call somebody Vincent Price. Yeah. Like, calm down, Vincent Price.
Yeah.
And there's so many movie references in it as well, which was, of course, what I loved.
Yeah.
And it is in this kind of sub genre of movie making, like satirical movies about filmmaking and stuff like that. Which we've seen a lot. Like I just mentioned, Cecil B. Demented. It's very much in that deranged wave.
In that film, I
ended up laughing just hysterically throughout it because of how over the top.
In that film, I tried to think of an episode or two ago, Matinee, that recent film that came out is.
Matinee is like a serious
giallo type of theater.
Feeling, and it because a lot of the murders take place inside of a movie theater.
Yeah.
So there's the whole Matt and
Yeah,
Hank connection there. And I was thinking of
I
that
see
last
Matt.
night.
Matt wants to say something, so go ahead. Yeah.
You see me very actively keeping myself quiet. That was my. That was me. That was an act. It's very hard.
He was trying. I know you were having a hard time. Yeah.
So number one, never heard of the film before you mentioned it. Number two, I cheated and looked it up while instead of listening to you patiently, I got so excited. I went on to IMDb. Number three, I've just seen Russian Doll. And so when I saw that it starred Natasha Lyonne, I'm like, oh, well, that's actually like a good enough reason for somebody to release it now, because I don't know how popular this film was. I happen to not have heard of it, but then all of the movies you mentioned are things I'm a fan of or know people. But I'm a Cheerleader actually has the Finger Book in it. I think that.
Oh wow!
There's a poster.
I didn't know that.
There's an Ooze poster, which was my old comedy group. It's like in the background because the woman who did the set design is Eddie Schmidt's, who I talked about, his wife actually. Did and worked on that movie, so I know that movie intimately. Also, I worked with those producers, and like I had the script ahead of time. Super fan of that, right? And all the tone stuff you hit is like, I'm like, yes, right? That was like so many yeses that as this went on, I was shamed I didn't know about it in a good way, right? Like now I have something new. This is why.
Yeah, now you can be excited about something.
Yeah, I am, and you saw it, and I wrote it down. So
I saw you write it. You even got the click on the mic.
I was like, this is why I love the stuff like, Mink Stole, right? Like, and everything that you said sounds exactly plausible for a filmmaker. And by the way, in 2010, right, which is now 12 years ago, right? I was saying like 15 years is sort of the edgy retro cutoff list. This is a little ahead of that, but the independent movies were very different then, right? That was like pre-social media. Like how did they get this movie out? And maybe it was playing. I live in Los Angeles. It might have been playing, but I just missed it, Yeah. And so that's what's great about these shows. And it just just everything about it sounds like I will find something interesting about it and an angle. And I would, of course, if it came out on disc or in a beautiful new transfer that other people could get to, rather than, like as you guys did, like when you want to talk about something, I'll watch it, like on Pixel Vision or whatever, I don't care, to just see it, but to see it in a great presentation is even better.
Yeah. And Severin's going to do that, obviously.
They're great. That's what I'm more excited about, is because the version on YouTube that you can watch right now is in 360p, I believe, or something like that.
2010.
That's like DVD
minus.
Worse.
Yeah.
That's like a low quality DVD.
Right.
So this is going to be 1080p. Obviously.
Yeah.
There's going to be some stuff we missed visually that we'll be able to pick up on.
I can only imagine, because there's a lot of gore effects in it. So the gore effects are going to pop more on screen in HD than, standard def YouTube. It's definitely a find, I think, for us.
Oh, it's great
for us fans.
Yeah,
and it's so good. And the art, and what we know about it so far, I think, is just we've seen the artwork, and the artwork looks great.
Yeah. That's the only thing they've released about it specifically.
Yeah. So and it looks, and the artwork's amazing. So yeah,
and it looks like it's going to be available through with their sale that's running June 10th through the 13th.
Yeah, so that's soon.
Very, very soon.
Physical fans, we have to wait, right? Because it's like you sometimes get like a 3-month. You can get up to like a 3-month lead, and you're like, but that's kind of part of the fun, right? Like, I'll wait on this. Like, I wrote that down in my longer term notebook of things to kind of like, even me physically writing it down helps me remember. And then when I see people starting to talk about it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to see it now, because that has me written all over it. That's why I follow podcasts. That's why I get on social media to find out about these things.
Awesome. Okay, Andrew, where do we want to go to next? Umbrella?
I mean, we covered a lot of Kino last week, so I think we'll save that for another time, because there was only actually like 3 or 4 new announcements this week. So I guess we'll move on to Umbrella, because that was kind of the only big major slate of the week. and it felt like we just talked about them, so this is a quick turnaround for them. But we've got a few things when it comes to them. They're putting out, well, it's already sold out, a collector's edition and a regular edition of The Love Witch, which is part of their Beyond Genres sub-label, I guess, or series. This is number 20. And there another Beyond Genre label or series that they're putting out. Number 19 is Hobo with a Shotgun.
Yes.
And then next is Dead Kids, also known as Strange Behavior. This is coming with a CD soundtrack and a full-size daybill. This is part of their Ozploitation Classics number 16. Lieutenant Jangles from 2018. And then they're putting out a double feature double feature of Ghoulies and Ghoulies 2. This is similar because I know Shout Factory put out a double feature of Ghoulies and Ghoulies 2 a couple of years ago. And then next we have a part of their retro sci-fi, and this is volume 4 line. And this is Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. And then lastly is a Tom Selleck film called Lassiter. Stephen, where do you want to start on this?
Man. You know, what's interesting is that the Buck Rogers thing, didn't Kino just put out a whole set of all the Buck Rogers stuff?
Well, Buck Rogers, I mean, first of all, it's the whole history of Buck Rogers, but it's a TV series.
Yeah.
And what this is
one of their movies?
No. It's basically a theatrical pilot for the show.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
That is the research that I did on that, is that it came out, I think it came out before the show, or
just in businessy at the time, what they would do, you know, because all these TV shows were shot on film, but the networks didn't have deals internationally with everybody, like they couldn't always sell the series. Yes. So they would take the pilot and usually some extra stuff and cut it together to release in movie theaters. Yeah. So
and Universal was responsible for that.
Universal did that all the time, like the Incredible Hulk, you know, and like Buck Rogers would be one. And for fans, right, what's fun is it's like usually a different edit, and they try to make it make sense as a movie.
They did. They would change stuff. Yeah, they would add footage. Sometimes they would edit it differently. I know specifically for Battlestar Galactica, which is in this set as well. This is a bit of a different story, because while the Buck Rogers came out before the show, and then like the show would then air after that, the Battlestar Galactica came out after the show was over. That original series only lasted one season originally. 22 episodes, I think, or whatever, 24. And then with the popularity of the Buck Rogers theatrical pilot, they were like, how can we capitalize on this? Oh, Battlestar Galactica. Let's just put the pilot together and make it like an extended pilot, and then we'll put that out, and people will go with that. And then, of course, Galactica 1980 was the follow-up 10-episode series for that original show. And, of course, we got the more Battlestar Galactica that people are more aware of in 2003 with a miniseries pilot, and then the 2004 through 2009 series, which is one of my all-time favorites. People probably remember that more than the original, depending on, I guess, what type of fan you are, when you were born, I guess. But
Oldiness.
This is an interesting double feature. Just that late 70s television sci-fi, not necessarily theatrical sci-fi. Yet again, we were just talking about that kind of late 70s era, where that post-Star Wars era, other studios are like, sci-fi is super popular now? What's this? Let's make our own. And Battlestar Galactica, if you watch this, so much was taken from Star Wars. Yeah. So much in it. Just the dogfighting, the way the miniature sets looked and all that stuff. And I know this is going off on a tangent, so reel me in. There were a lot of lawsuits going on at the time of suing Universal about it.
Yeah.
And the thing that they added, and I can't friggin' remember the name of the technology, and
Sense-Around.
That's it. So I was very little. I saw it with Sense-Around. It made me want to poop myself. It was like so base oriented. And as a little kid, I didn't really know any, like I was like, oh, I'd seen it on TV and it was space. You know what like I wasn't. And then when I went and watched it, I'm like, I kind of already saw this, but it was different, right? That was my little kid thinking. But my biggest memory was that my intestines were going to explode, like in that Simpsons THX fake THX trailer. And
that's kind of the way it was. They only did censor on, I think, with like, I was it like 6 movies or so, 4 to 6 movies.
Very few.
It was very small, limited,
and they rolled it in. So I grew up in a town, well, next to a town in New Jersey, which was the place where movie studios would test stuff. Now, again, I didn't learn that until I was in my 40s, right? But I'd be like, I'd have these memories and people go, not many people think that they saw Star Wars in 70 millimeter and 6 channel, but they didn't. And I'd be like, oh, maybe I was, no. Oh, I'm reading now a news clipping that says it is only in X number of theaters and in this one in the town next to me, because all the New York executives would come to that town. They'd be like, this is America, right? Like even though
small town America.
Yeah, it was 10 miles from the George Washington Bridge, and my part of New Jersey was representing everywhere. But the Star Wars, for example, was in this giant movie theater that was playing the magnetic multiple strip, 70 millimeter print. They found a junky little theater that was junky at the time, that when I was in high school, they would put Rocky Horror Picture Show in for Battlestar Galactica. And they wheeled these giant speakers in and just put them in the aisles. You had to like walk around them. It was so, again, I was like 8 or 9. It was so janky that I knew it. And I'm like, let's sit away from these. I mean, they're so distracting. But I remember it, right? Like that's what's funny about that. And that those weren't shown everywhere in that way. So in a weird way, I feel I was lucky. But this, as you said, like, what a great idea as a collector set, because these are rarer forms of the TV, and they would have been stored in the vault differently, right? Because they were cleared for an international cut. And on a weird little technical note, if these shows were shown like that internationally, it is one of the few original prints on 35 that you can show in a movie theater legally, right? Because like when we would have a TV release, I would have to research and find out, especially if it was like a 60s or 70s show, was it cleared internationally for theatrical? Otherwise, the legal department, I couldn't, it just wasn't cleared for theater. I don't know if people are as diligent about that then, but they would shut me down. They'd be like, no, you can't, like I couldn't show Bad Ronald in the theater because that didn't show, that's a 1972 TV movie, horror movie about a kid who, a murdering child who was papered into the walls of a house, and a new family comes in and he's spying on them and eating their food. It's a great creepy movie, but I couldn't show that. But yet another one from them, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, which has little demons that come out. Again, I didn't see those when those came out. I wasn't cognizant, but I would hear about those TV movies, right? And the fact now somebody finds these beautiful 35 millimeter prints because they don't get shown internationally. Now you can show in a movie theater. How cool is that, right? And then those elements would then be used to make the Blu-ray. There, I worked all of TV history into that release.
It's very interesting how television worked in the 70s. The way it works now. I mean, sometimes they don't even have pilots for shows anymore. In a lot of cases, some go straight to series. Right. Some get ordered straight to series. I know HBO tends to do that a lot, where they're just like straight to series. But when it comes to these two films, when it comes to the way they've come out here in the U.S., is that Kino has put out Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, and Universal Studios themselves have put out a Blu-ray of Battlestar Galactica. and it's kind of interesting how in Umbrella's got them both combined into one set, and they're very much relics of their time, but they're dated, of course, technology, television, movie making, all that kind of stuff. But there was a lot of money pumped into specifically Battlestar Galactica. I think the pilot, they paid like $7 million, $8 million to put into that, because originally the concept was that it was going to be part of some deal they had with, I forget who. It was going to be a miniseries, like a 3-episode miniseries. And after the second episode was so popular, they're like, no, we're going to turn it into a series right away. So it kind of threw that whole show into a whole kerfuffle. That's television, that's not movies. But I just think that's kind of an interesting late 70s sci-fi double feature. Television kind of twist thrown in there as well.
Yeah.
But Steven, is there anything else here that looked interesting to you?
With the shotgun, I think that's something that it became a very, very much a cult thingy very quickly.
Yeah, it was part of that whole 2000s like grindhouse, reinteresting grindhouse movies, thanks to Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez with their grindhouse movies, Planet Terror and Death Proof, respectively. And I think Hobo with a Shotgun, didn't that have like, wasn't it one of the trailers that was in?
Yes.
One of the fake trailers that they played and they turned into a movie?
Practically.
There was a bunch of like fake trailers in there.
Practically, like it feels to me like every fake movie trailer in there, they're like, oh, let's make a movie out of it.
Yeah, just like the Machete movies, right? Yeah.
Yes.
But what a fun, like when that came out, I went, like they would book it with both films and the trailers between, right? Because they were trying to recreate the Grindhouse experience. And that was a great way to release it, right? Because, theaters, independent theaters nationwide had access to this new take on an old thing and introduced that aesthetic to the public. At the time, too, it was interesting because you could tell like who was kind of a fan of what based on what film they liked, or like in my case, rewatching it now, when I saw it at first, I was like, I really liked, it was fun. The Robert Rodriguez movie was so much fun to see with the crowd. And then I saw the trailers, and then the Quentin Tarantino film, Death Proof, felt lower energy to me. And I was like, oh, is this the B movie? Right? Because it's like, because like the Robert Rodriguez film is the A movie in a Grindhouse thing. And as I've gotten more into Grindhouse and 70s, Quentin Tarantino's movie is a kind of a masterpiece deconstruction of what those movies are more actually like, So, hey, time travel, it happens 1 second at a time for everybody.
And it's interesting, that particular genre too, because it's almost weird because it's like we recreate the style, but the style is created by the fact it wasn't on purpose.
Yeah.
Like they're B movies. But the only reason the aesthetic style is there is because they just got worn out. Like it's not on purpose necessarily.
Yes.
They were low budget at the time they were made. Yeah. They weren't purposely made to be low budget. And then all that
scratches is just because like it was shown so many times and the films got scratched and they...
the film just naturally got deteriorated like that. It wasn't purposely deteriorated.
But now they're making them purposely look like that.
Oh, because we have the technology.
Yeah. That's a podcast. But but I feel that Rodriguez and Tarantino were emulating, not that you go to, you were there when they came out. It was that you were going to a theater watching them now, which is why they were scratched up. And one of the reasons why Tarantino now has the New Beverly Theater here, because now he can program movies like that, right? Because that was in his wheelhouse. But if you don't pay attention, you think that people are celebrating the scratched up aesthetic as something new. And I don't think that like celebrating the aesthetic brings anything to the Winning Time. I don't know if you've seen that on HBO. I know what
you're talking about. Yeah,
I love it. But sometimes I find like nobody ever watched Super 8 film with the sprocket hole in it because the sprocket was moving the film. You're just advertising to me that this is a film format, but they really did shoot, a lot of that with vintage equipment. So it's like, did they feel people wouldn't know unless they broadcast it, right? It's so, but that's an aesthetics argument, and as an aficionado, I have opinions on that.
That, like you said, a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But I think Hobo with a Shotgun's one I think people will be very interested in trying to upgrade, and if it's an upgrade in there for their collection.
Well, there was a Blu-ray release when it came out. The movie came out in 2011. Of course, I failed to mention the movie stars the late, Rutger Hauer, as well. He is the hobo with a shotgun, and the movie is obviously way over the top and all those things. But it did get a Blu-ray release. It's still in print here. And I'm not sure if there's a difference in terms of special features or anything like that. But I do like this. The cover of it, I think, is really cool.
Yeah.
I really like
and
that.
And it's got its package has got like a VHS type of
aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
Aesthetic, yeah. It's.
Are you guys judging a movie by its cover?
No, I appreciate if someone puts some effort into it.
Yeah,
I've seen some pretty lazily type things when it comes to covers.
I'm the first person to judge something. I mean, people do judge by the cover, right? Like, if you had a choice of covers and you know that the inside of a book or a record or a disc is the same, you could make a choice. It's not, I don't care, right? No, you're like, no, I like that one.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem hard.
We talk about this all the time, but there's some of these labels that are putting out the same films, so you have to find a way to entice customers to either double dip or to decide between one or the other. And a lot of times it's them adding extra things. Or going for that new artwork or giving options like Arrow does a lot, where they're like, here's the new artwork and here's the original artwork. They cover all their bases. And so, it sometimes it takes just a great aesthetic of the release for people to make a decision. Yeah.
It's, there's always a point that's too far, which I call the 90s comic book, do you have the foil stamped cover and the just foil cover, right? Okay, no.
It's one of them things we talk about a lot recently, and we do like to make sure that when people, because collecting, everybody has their own styles of how they collect things, and I do like to preface that I prefer, for me, that I'm trying to collect most things because of the movies, that I'm interested in the films, not necessarily to have all of this stuff because I need to have every Arrow release or every, like it becomes not about the movies. So I do like to preface that I try to collect. There are some exceptions. There are some things where I'm like, okay, I really like the Indicator stuff in their limited edition box sets, and I want to have all of them. Some of the movies I might not be like super enthusiastic about, but them are my exceptions. But for the most part, I try to collect because I'm interested in the movies. Yeah. So that needs to be kept in mind always. But
right.
Yeah, and not just about the aesthetics of the package or all that stuff. And a lot of people don't care about that. Just they just go for some people just still buy DVDs. They don't care.
Right.
Oh yeah, DVD still owns the market share.
Still does.
Percentages.
Yeah. And
every time I see an article, it's always DVD taking up most of the pie.
Yeah.
And that is true within sales within the studio. It's like and people don't almost want to even acknowledge it, but it's like it just is. That's when I said when I am going to choose because I think I'm going to keep the physical rights to the movie I produced just because I know how to do it. It makes more economic sense to release a DVD, but as a collector, of course I want to release a Blu-ray, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, I put both in, but I it's coming out of my the movie's pocket, let's say, so it's a tough choice, but it just DVD, if you're gonna do disc, their DVD only isn't terrible.
No, a lot of the players nowadays kind of do an upgrade, grade to the picture itself. It's not that bad. It's fine. I can, if I really want something, I still have DVDs in my collection, and sometimes there's the only way you can get the movie.
Yeah.
Even for films that came out years and years ago, they only have a DVD, and I'm like, well, I gotta have it so I can watch it, and it's it. That's what it is.
As somebody who keeps a lot of discs around, of course I'm gonna keep a Blu-ray off of, if I have a DVD and the Blu-ray is available, well, that's not, right? Because I have the player. It's always one of those collecting things. Like every collector has their
own style, has their own process. And
I have 4K, but I haven't even begun to think about that because it's like,
I have my own style about it. Andrew has his own style about what he should buy.
What do you guys, just very quick, what is like your 4K window?
My preference is usually, I don't know.
It's hard.
I go back. It's tough. I go back and forth about it. Typically, I don't go for a lot of older films because I feel
I'm the opposite.
Right? Yeah, he's the opposite. He
also good reason.
Yeah, I do have some older films, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like the more we try to push the boundaries of what the picture's supposed to look like, it starts to really change. I don't know if it's changing for the good or the bad. I don't know. I mean, obviously the image is more crisp and everything, but are we getting further away from what it was supposed to look like? I don't know.
I think it looks more accurate to what it originally.
But how do we know?
That seems.
I guess unless. And that's the thing
unless you got people who were there at the time.
That's the thing. Even the people that are there at the time are working on the film. They change their mind.
Yes.
It's like just like the Coen brothers situation we talk about with Miller's Crossing so many times. They've decided that they're going to make a change on the movie, and then they do that, and then that's because that's how they say they originally intended to do it. So it's like hard to decide what is like.
Are you saying Joel shot first?
Yes.
That was boom. That's the two memes.
Yeah.
It's really tough even from a technical standpoint, right? All that stuff that you say is true, and there's film and filmmaking, television, right? It's not. I mean, even paint on a canvas, right? Like there is no one correct answer because there's leeway in everything, right? How bright is the bulb, and the projector, right? What kind of TV do you have? Is the color correction off? Like there's always a tolerance. With 4K, as somebody who sat through a lot of, and been shown different studio hardware tests, the resolution is evident on, if there's textures, right? And that's where sometimes with black and white, even you see it like, oh, wow, I now see the bark. Literally the bark on a tree is now way more in focus and pops. But in many shots, nothing pops, right? It's professionals, it's hard to tell the difference. The color technology, right? When they do and it depends on which version you're using, right? But when you're popping up those colors in 4K, which is a different process, that's really what you notice, where you notice the difference, right? The blacks are blacker and all this other stuff. But there's a realm of more modern films where the color has been so manipulated by, programs like DaVinci or these other color correction programs where directors will be like, this movie's going to be blue. And, it has an aesthetic appeal, right? In the theater. But when in 4K, you're trying to pull out more color from it, right? To pop it, the color's not there because they've already limited, the director or the post people have limited the palette. So the difference between a 2K presentation and a 4K UHD isn't as apparent, right? But again, when Blu-ray first came out, sometimes a really well done DVD and a shitty Blu-ray, it actually honestly could be a little hard for the average person to tell the difference. But now you can tell the difference right away because you just have gotten so used to 2K. You're like, oh, that's really good SD, right? But by the way, people get served SD all the time on streaming services and don't know it.
Oh yes, they do.
They don't know it. They think it like says 4K on it, right? And they're like, oh, it's 4K, but they're,
Well, I think ultimately my decision, it's not always necessarily about like, it is somewhat about the image quality or the how much it changes the image, but sometimes it's just about the fact that I feel like what we get out of Blu-ray is really good already, and I don't feel the need to upgrade something that already looks pretty damn good.
Right. My idea is almost more pick and choosy depending on the Blu-ray.
Yeah.
For example, I just held up Rare Window and Vertigo. Universal put these out on Blu-ray a decade ago, and those Blu-rays notoriously had problems, to say the least. So now that they are upgraded them to a more substantially better quality, I got to jump on that. Just because it's significant change.
And that's one of the ones I got. I got Rear Window because it's my favorite Hitchcock film.
And that's right? But that's more about the individual. And you guys are educated consumers. It's more about the individual master. Like you just said, like, when the old master was done. So new master is going to look better, right?
Yeah.
Whether, if I don't have a 4K player and I get a Blu-ray of the newer master, it's going to look a lot better, right? That's just a fact, right? But 4K will look even better. So why not get that if I have that equipment? Like, there's no reason not to. It's just interesting because it's like it's a slippery slope in some ways, but then when you do the research, it becomes more obvious. But will consumers do the research? Do they know?
No, I don't think most.
No,
I don't think most will. But but there's just like some. I think you even brought this example up, Andrew. But they're putting out movies like Van Helsing, in 4K, and it's like, do I need Van Helsing on 4K when it just came out like maybe 5 years ago or whatever, 6? I don't know how long ago.
Well, I meant the movie came out in 2007, but I'm just saying, like, there's certain movies that they're putting out in 4K where I don't think it necessarily need to be out in 4K, just because I don't know how much of an advance, like, one, the movie itself, and two, is it necessary? But yet again, I don't have the numbers to see what they're looking at where to make it worth their while.
They also may have a 4K master, right, available because you want to make a 4K master available for streaming.
And they may have it,
and so why not
readily available?
Like that. Sometimes sometimes the Blu-ray comes out because somebody paid for an HD master for a streaming service, and so it's sitting there, and you're like, well, that doesn't cost much or anything, or it's available. I could license it. If you're in a studio, you could license it to a third party or put it out yourself. And that's a business, right? It's a business decision. But as a consumer, and if you're spending a lot of money, this is the thing with home entertainment, being educated about what you're getting is helpful, right? Buying stuff, finding out when the sales are, buying it on sale, finding out if this release is good or not is great. Like, I love buying releases 6 months after they came out, because I'll go on a site and I'll be like, oh, look at all this stuff half off. And I'm like, I love so much stuff. So I'm like, oh, $10, it all hits my yes point. And now I've got stacks of discs I didn't work on waiting for me to watch, which is like the fun pile, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we loved, the bringing up Warner Archive again. The 4 for $44 was just...
Oh, that was the sale. But not only was it that, but they had to go one step further where it was 5 for $55, 6 for $66.
It was
just... Yeah, it was.
I was in on the coupon.
People went crazy.
That. It was so successful when we were running the shop that we were able to negotiate that it could continue. And this year, they put it on Movie Zing, which I don't know if you guys had a chance to go to. But the interesting thing about Movie Zing is that service is run by the company that does the manufacturing of the assembly and some of the manufacturing of the discs. So that's a supplier that a lot of different manufacturers use to create MOD items. So their store, while it is not well marketed, always will give you a good broad sense of what is in in that space, especially now that Amazon has shut down their Create Space service. So there's a tip.
Yeah.
Movie Zing.
That's insider look.
Yeah. Like never heard of it, but it's a way. They don't have a lot of sales though, but their feed is valuable.
Yeah. All right. Well, other than that, anything else in this umbrella slate?
Yeah, I mean, the movie.
I mean, there's Goalies.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll get to that. Dead Kids, also known as Strange Behavior, is an interesting movie where it's a horror film, obviously, with that title. It takes place in like a quiet, like a one of those small town horror films where like evil stuff's going on, behind the scenes. So basically, what is going on is that teenagers are basically being experimented on and brainwashed into committing murders, and for a specific reason. Though there is someone doing things for revengeful purposes, I believe, and it's really fascinating. And it's not a bad concept of a movie. It's kind of an 80s slasher, teen slasher type movie. But I thought it was actually very interesting. Coincidentally, who is in the movie is Louise Fletcher, who notoriously, portrayed and I believe won an Oscar for playing Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So she is in that film, kind of the only recognizable actor I recognize, at least. And what is interesting about this release is that it does come with the CD soundtrack, and the music is done by Tangerine Dream, which a lot of 80s aficionados are going to know very, very well, and just music aficionados as well. But one of the exclusive special features on here, and I had no idea about this until right now, is there's a Dead Kids 2 that came out in 1996, which is an unofficial fan feature film.
Oh, wow.
That was shot in the same town that I think they used for the movie. That's just fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
And, just thinking about what you're saying about what the film's about, wonder if, and this is an Australian film, though, I wonder if the cultural time where this was like at the end of the 70s, like where we had a lot of serial killer type of things with like brainwashing and like wonder, the Mansons, of course that was a little bit 10 years earlier, but like that stuff continued, the serial killer kind of culture kind of kept going with Zodiac and like all that. Like, wonder if that played a part in the inspiration for this particular,
That's interesting. Well, I meant like, it seems to be part of that subgenre of horror films in the 80s about teenagers and strange goings on with teenagers. I think a lot of that's obviously been taken out. Coincidentally, when I was watching the movie, it reminded me a lot of how we bringing it back to Netflix, Stranger Things. This scientific corporation in this small town doing nefarious things, and then the townsfolk kind of have to take the repercussions of that. But they're not doing it. I don't want to say anything about it, but I'll just say like it's obviously not as grand a concept as Stranger Things is. There's a lot of sci-fi and things going on there, fantasy and whatnot.
All right.
This is more literal what's going on, but with of course some science in there. But it's an interesting film, and I actually liked it. I was expecting it to be kind of one of the barely get through 80s types of slasher movies or whatnot, like low budgeted and stuff. It doesn't have great acting or great any of this, but I like the concept of it. And I like the way it was executed, and it's interesting, kind of an Ozploitation era type horror film.
Okay. Anything to add, Matt?
Yeah.
Ozploitation is a great subgenre that I feel a lot of labels have been kind of explaining to people now. Like, I guess Canucksploitation would be number one. I have not seen this film. We had a great pitch, and Tangerine Dream itself, if people are unfamiliar, that is like, Tangerine Dream plus John Carpenter equals 80s horror, right?
Yeah.
And that is, exactly what you said. Like, I don't know if this is a kids on bikes film, but it's, small town, strange goings on is exactly Stranger Things. And the Tangerine Dream is like right on the nose, right? So of course, when you see it now, you're like, oh. And again, it's like the Grindhouse films. Like, what are the influences of things that we're seeing now, even if they're obscure? Right now, this is sounds like a great little piece to a puzzle that from these indie labels. Like, why not take some time and explore it, right? If you like Stranger Things, here's a great building block to that I haven't seen, and from another country.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, so let's move on to probably the final thing we'll discuss, and that is Ghoulies and Ghoulies 2.
Oh, yeah.
Because these movies could not be more different from one another. When you think of, like, when you just see the poster, you're thinking, okay, Gremlins ripoff, right? Yeah. It's in that same era, probably kind of coasting on the popularity of Gremlins and whatnot. But similar to Gremlins and Gremlins 2, the original movie and the sequel, completely different films. The first Ghoulies film is dealing with how do I say this, like satanic cult type stuff, or just cult type stuff in general. Mm-hmm. The movie starts with like almost a I think it is like a human sacrifice type stuff, like dark magic and whatnot, and that's how kind of the Ghoulies come to be. and then what happens is you flash forward, and this child who was almost sacrificed at the beginning of the movie is now an adult, moving back into the old house in which everything took place, and then he starts getting into the dark magic and doing stuff, and he gets further and further deeper, and then he finds out all this kind of connection that he has with it, and you've got these little creatures popping up every now and then throughout the movie, these ghoul type creatures. And then the second film, completely different, is more like Gremlins, where the Ghoulies, after the events of the first film, end up at a circus, and they end up becoming an attraction in like a haunted house type setting, and it becomes super popular, but they're murdering patrons. And then you follow somebody who's working there trying to like stop this from happening, and that is kind of how you summarize Ghoulies and Ghoulies 2. And it's a fun double feature.
It feels like these movies should have came out by full moon. Like it's got that puppet master.
I think Charles Band and those guys had a hand in some. I don't know. I'm not a full Ghoulies scholar, but
no.
And what you were saying is like on track with what I know, and I think also the rights were sort of going back and forth, right? So that's like in that world, and especially in the 80s, and especially when you could put it on a VHS box, like the unofficial sequel in horror is not an uncommon territory, right? And then it can also lead to fun things like, what's your favorite Ghoulies movie, right? Because they're all so different.
There's like 4 of them in there. There's like at least 4.
Yeah, I think at least 4. But I like Ghoulies Go to College because they come up through the toilet and into a frat.
Nice.
But
yeah, that is actually one of them, which is, by that point, you're just so far removed from the whole origin cult type stuff that,
which was like a satanic.
They're just playing into it.
Yeah, it was like a satanic panic begin. Like 1985, right? The first Ghoulies movie was playing off like a satanic panic, trope, which was actually very real in the 80s. I think that some people are now exploring that more with documentaries, but for real, like the people at Dungeons and Dragons changed the game so that people would stop protesting it because they thought it was impacting sales, right? So now, these guys, right, in the mid 80s, they're like, oh well, F them, and put that into this, and then it becomes crazy by the 90s. It's fun. And I don't know what the difference, and you don't really know what the difference in the releases are, because these have been packaged and repackaged many times.
I know that Shout Factory put out a release of these in 2015, right. A double feature.
I remember.
In of itself, it may be out of print.
I think I have that one.
Yeah, it may be out of print as of this moment, so I don't know who has the U.S. rights now.
Yeah.
Very curious who has the U.S. rights. I don't even know who the company that originally made the films was. Was it? I can't remember the title of the company.
I think it's Empire Pictures, I believe.
Yeah, okay. I think it was. I was just going to say Empire or something like that.
Because it has this like tangled, it has a tangled web that happened at the time. But Ghoulies, like out of all the knockoffs, right? Like what are kind of lumped
Trolls
in. And the
Hobgoblins.
Right. And like, the difference between Troll and Troll 2, which is not a sequel, but MGM owns both. There's a great documentary about the making of Trolls 2. They're just fun,
Yeah, they're fun movies, yeah. Like I said, Puppet Master. Puppet Master I love Puppet Master, and the series goes on forever, and it's going through so many different like shifts in tone and like but they're fun. They're fun.
That's all they're designed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a fine level of entertainment, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Very much. Yeah, I didn't have a bad time watching either of the movies, even though they were wildly different. I think the second one's better than the first because it just plays into, I don't know if it's because I'm more attached to the Gremlins vibe, but it plays into the more like they're little mischievous monsters doing monstrous type stuff versus like this whole
satanic
cult type backstory.
Yeah, that's the biggest difference, just like you said. Like it's like because the one is more like a satanic panic one, and the second one are like wee, and then
and
then the third one
just
is
wild chaos.
Like
the third act of the movie is just wild chaos.
And then the third movie is like if they put those creatures in, like Porky's, right? Which sounds
or an Animal House
sounds like a good pitch. And that's all they needed then. They're like,
that's probably why they pitched
sold. Okay.
Go for it.
Go film some stuff in a frat.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good. Yeah. Good place to stop here.
Yeah, I've seen the other films, but I guess we've talked about enough.
Yeah, we've got a lot in here.
Lasseter's got Tom Selleck being Tom Selleck in the 80s. He's essentially Magnum PI as like a jewel thief.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested in that.
Awesome.
He's stealing diamonds from the Nazis in 1939.
Great.
That's the premise of that movie.
Is the mustache like feel like it fits?
It's there. It's prominent.
Does it fit?
Yeah.
Okay.
It definitely fits.
It's a demon.
It's a demon.
And then the Love Witch is kind of a throwback 70s film that came out in 2016 where it's about like magic and tarot reading, and they actually give you like a tarot deck collector's edition version of it in the movie as well. And this woman just kind of she's obsessed with this man. It's a whole big thing in it. It's definitely a modern day cult film that was making the festival circuits. I remember in 2016. Then a lot of they got a lot more buzz about it when it became streaming and stuff like that later on. So that's kind of wraps up the whole Umbrella slate.
All right.
I would recommend Love Witch as well, and just to tie it in because
it's psychedelic, very psychedelic.
But as we were kind of talking about Grindhouse, that film Love Witch is definitely of that because it is a modern version of like a 70s sex Italian horror American, right? Like so, and has that aesthetic.
It's very much like that, and it plays into that. Like it has the music, it's got the aesthetic, it's got the vibe. It's a unique kind of modern throwback film.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Matt, thank you for joining us, man. It was great talking with you.
Oh, it's always fun to talk. You didn't know that it was going to be 12 hours of you're not the only one that we've had on that is a talker. You're not. We've done this before. Okay.
And we like to talk too. Not as much as you, but we do like to talk. No. but no.
I warned you.
No, you did, and it was great. We got a lot of great stuff, a lot of great stories. I think people will really love hearing some of these stories you had to tell us, and I'd love to bring you back and do it again.
Anytime, and you can of course tune into Archive Guys. I will say that I edit those down to an hour, and I have cut an hour out of Dan and I talking because I'm like, nobody can stand this. Yeah, I have one I'm cutting, and it takes a long time to cut them down.
So you need to do a Patreon where you do the full cut.
Yes. You know what? I would actually pay people to listen to it would be a reverse Patreon.
Okay.
The
Okay.
opposite.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Opposite PayPal.
But you have to take a quiz.
opposite.
You have to take a quiz at the end to prove that you listened to the whole thing.
That's a good idea.
And then I'll give you 50 cents.
That's a good idea. That's a great idea.
There.
Nice.
Yeah. But
what I do with
Archive
therapy.
Guys. Yeah, Archive Guys. That's on. I'm sure all the major platforms like Apple Podcast and all that.
Archiveguys.com. You can figure it out from there.
Cool. Andrew, where can you be found?
You can find me on Twitter at Capzilla06, as well as our YouTube channel, Chasing Labels.
And you can find me on Facebook, Stephen Billings, or on all the other Chasing Labels places, whether it be our Twitter, Instagram, or you can follow me on my Letterboxd at Chasing Labels. You can also find the audio for the podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and other places. Thanks again for listening, and hey, keep on watching them movies.
I know I will.
I followed you both.